Hey guys, tonight we're rolling back the foggy curtain of time and stepping into a place that smells like damp wool, boiled cabbage, and maybe something worse. We're talking rural Victorian England, where the countryside looks charming from a distance, but the second you get close, your boots sink into a puddle of cow dung, and you realise that romanticised history has done some serious Photoshop work on this era. You probably won't survive this. That's not a joke. Statistically, if you were born into a rural working-class family in, say, 1842, you might not even make it to your 12th birthday. And if you do, it's less of a celebration and more of a quiet nod from the universe saying, well, let's see what else you can handle. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me, what time is it where you are, and what city are you listening from? I always love hearing where we're all dreaming from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing in the centre of a tiny village, no more than 30 or 40 cottages clustered around a dirt road that looks more like a trench. The air is thick with chimney smoke and manure, and there's a persistent scent of rot that clings to the back of your throat. It's not one thing, it's everything. Decay is the baseline aroma of your life here. You're used to it though. You've never known otherwise. The cottages, if you can call them that, are lopsided and sagging, made from stone and wattle and daub, with thatched roofs that attract every mouse and spider within a 5-mile radius. Most families live in a single room. Yes, one. You sleep there, eat there, give birth there, and occasionally die there. There's usually one small window which lets in more wind than light, and a door that doesn't quite fit its frame. Let's say you live in one of these charming hovels. You share it with your mother, father, 4 siblings, and possibly your grandfather who lost a few toes to a bad case of foot rot 2 winters ago. There's one straw mattress for the adults, and the children sleep on the floor. You're one of the lucky ones. Your house has a fire pit. No chimney though, so the smoke just hangs out near the ceiling, giving everything that rich black tar finish. And you're never clean. No one is. Bathing isn't a regular thing, it's more of a yearly tradition, like a birthday or harvest. You might wipe your hands with a rag if you're fancy, but most days you just let the grime pile on. It acts like a second skin, one that doesn't come off unless you fall in a river or get caught in a rainstorm. The village itself is a patchwork of filth. Pigs roam freely through the lanes, leaving behind steaming gifts. Geese and chickens flap underfoot. There's no sewer system, so waste is tossed into the ditch that runs along the road, if people bother to walk that far. The phrase night soil exists because folks often empty their chamber pots right out the door. A lot of people think medieval life was disgusting and Victorian life was cleaner. That is deeply incorrect. In many rural towns, especially before the Public Health Acts, people lived more like livestock than like the cleanly Victorians you see in oil paintings. Here's a fun fringe fact. In some villages, the pavement was made of packed manure mixed with straw. It was a kind of do-it-yourself solution to the eternal mud problem. Didn't exactly solve it, but hey, it gave your boots something to stick to. That thick layer of slop was called muck, and it was just part of the landscape. Children played in it. Dogs rolled in it. You probably fell face first into it once or twice. But not everything is entirely bleak. There's a rhythm to rural life, even if that rhythm is mostly coughing, trudging, and the occasional scream. You wake with the sun, or before it, depending on your chores. No clocks, just roosters and the occasional church bell. The land controls your life. You grow what you eat, and you eat what survives the bugs, blight and frost. Every season is a gamble. Harvest fails. Guess who's eating moss and boiled bark soup this winter? Scholars still debate just how bad things were in the early Victorian countryside. Some argue that rural life, while physically rough, offered tighter communities and more fresh air than industrial towns. Others point out that the isolation, lack of medical care and brutal work conditions actually made it worse. The truth? Probably somewhere in the mud between. And let's not pretend everyone had a farm. You might be a labourer, hauling stones for roadwork, or a shepherd working someone else's flock for pennies and scraps. Some jobs were so seasonal and precarious that entire families starved during slow months. Debt was a death sentence, or at least a sentence to the workhouse, which we'll get to later. Spoiler, it's worse than it sounds. Your day ends early because candles cost money and oil lamps are a luxury. Most folks go to bed with the sun, not because they're virtuous, but because it's too dark to do anything else. But sleep isn't restful. The mattress, if you have one, is full of bedbugs. You hear rats under the floorboards. or worse, crawling over the rafters. There's no lock on the door, and your roof leaks when it rains. Every season brings a new disaster. Floods, frost, foxes or fire. You're always one mistake or one sneeze, away from total ruin. And yet, people persist. They joke. They sing. Someone always has a fiddle. Someone else bakes a loaf and shares it. The local alehouse, even if it's just a room with a bench and a barrel, is where the world feels a bit lighter. In between all the rot and misery, there's still a pulse, a grim, muddy, soot-covered heartbeat that keeps the village alive. Because even when life is rotten, it doesn't stop, and neither do you. You're born on a stormy Tuesday in late November, just as the winds shift and the chimney smoke starts blowing back into the room. The midwife is a stout woman who smells like damp leather and root vegetables, and she's delivered almost everyone in the village, though some of them didn't stick around long. She arrives with her cracked hands, a cloth bundle, and a bottle of something sharp that might be gin or just homemade vinegar. You come out screaming, which is a good sign, and are immediately swaddled in an old flannel shirt once worn by your oldest brother, now long dead of something no one could name at the time. There's no hospital. There's not even a doctor nearby unless someone rides 5 miles to fetch the one who smells like pipe smoke and rum. So instead, the women of the house handle things. Your mother lies panting on a straw mattress, blood soaking the sheets, sweat rolling down her face, her eyes wide with exhaustion, but already darting toward the next crisis. There's no rest after childbirth, no quiet moment, no flower bouquet or congratulatory card. The moment you're out, the fire needs stoking, the bread's burning, and the baby, you, needs feeding, assuming there's any milk to be had. The walls of the cottage do little to block the cold. Winter whistles through the cracks in the stone. Rats scurry across the rafters, and someone's boots stink of the barn. The family crowd in to meet you. No one is really smiling. New babies mean more mouths, and more mouths mean tighter belts. Still, someone carves a mark on the old beam above the hearth. Another soul born under this roof. Another name for the Lord's ledger. From the very beginning, everything hurts. You're swaddled too tightly because that's how babies are kept straight. Loose limbs make for crooked bones, so your arms are bound to your sides, and you squirm helplessly. The cloth they use hasn't been washed properly in weeks, maybe months, and your skin breaks out in a rash within days. No one notices. Every baby gets it. You cry, but everyone's used to crying. It's part of the wallpaper. Your mother is already pregnant again by the time you turn 1, and half her attention is spent trying not to faint from exhaustion. One of the most overlooked miseries of rural Victorian infancy is how close you always are to death. Your sister before you died, before she turned 3. The brother before her lasted 5 months. Infant mortality rates hover around 150 deaths per 1,000 live births in some areas. Diseases like diphtheria, typhus, and the flux, a polite way of saying horrible, endless diarrhea, swoop in like silent predators. No one has heard of germ theory yet. If a baby dies, it's God's will. If it lives, it's because your mother keeps a clean house, though nobody's definition of clean would pass modern inspection. Here's a nasty little fact for your sleep tonight. Babies were sometimes soothed by dipping cloth in laudanum, an opium-based syrup sold cheaply in every village shop, just a drop on the tongue or tucked in a rag for sucking. You cry? Here, have a little sleep syrup. It calms your nerves and slows your breathing. Many babies never woke back up, but it was common practice, especially for poor mothers with too many children and no help. You're lucky to survive your first few years. You're fed mostly on watered-down cow's milk, thin porridge, and bits of mashed turnip. Teething biscuits? Never heard of them. Your toys are a wooden spoon and a rock. If you're really lucky, someone might whittle you a tiny horse, which you'll promptly drop into the fireplace. No one replaces it. Life is training you for disappointment early. Your earliest memories are of your mother humming near the fire and your father cursing in the yard. There's always tension. There's always noise. Sometimes your uncle shows up drunk and starts shouting about the coal tax or those bastards in London, and everyone pretends not to notice. Domestic violence isn't a scandal. It's just Wednesday. The neighbours hear everything through the walls, but they've got their own shouting to worry about. There is one point of joy. Babies are everyone's business. You're passed around like bread at supper. Your grandmother sniffs your head and clucks her tongue. The neighbour girl brings you a pebble she claims is magic. The dog curls at your feet, licking your toes while you giggle uncontrollably. In the middle of so much filth and fatigue, Your smile is a bright, irrational thing. No one can afford to stop working, but someone always pauses to poke your belly or blow a raspberry on your cheek. Still, it doesn't take long for the sweetness of babyhood to end. By the time you can walk, you're already expected to help. You toddle out to the yard to feed chickens or collect sticks. You're scolded if you wander too close to the well. You're told to stop crying before you've even learned what feelings are. Childhood here is brief and bleak. There's no time for wonder or imagination, at least not openly. The adults might still mutter stories about fairies in the woods or spirits that live in the hills, but your world is mostly made up of chores, hunger, and cold toes. Scholars argue about just how much attention rural Victorian parents paid to their children. Some sources claim kids were loved and cherished within the limits of poverty. Others suggest children were treated more like miniature adults, useful when helpful, ignored when not. The reality probably lives in the grey. Your parents love you, but their affection is measured in crusts of bread and rare smiles, not kisses or lullabies. When you're not sick with croup or scabbing over with chickenpox, you mostly crawl around barefoot in the dirt, smearing your face with soot and snot. There are no nappies, just cloth and crossed fingers. Someone dunks you in a washtub once a month, usually after you're caught eating something weird off the floor. You scream the whole time. The water's cold, the soap stings, and your mother's patience is already running on fumes. You're not yet aware that you live in a time when the rural poor are being studied like specimens by well-meaning reformers and horrified city journalists. To them, your life is a cautionary tale, a tragedy to be fixed or forgotten. To you, it's just life. You're alive, and that's more than can be said for the baby next door who died last week of wasting fever. No one knows what that means. The body was buried before anyone could ask. But you're still here, and your story's just getting started. You're barely 5 years old and already your hands are raw. Not from colouring with chalk or climbing trees. What trees? The one tree near the church is used for hangings and livestock shade. No, your hands are raw from pulling water up from the village well using a thick hemp rope that slices your palms when it's wet. Your job, every morning before the sun's fully up, is to carry a small wooden pail of water back to the cottage. The pail leaks, your arms shake. But if you spill too much, your father yells, and your mother sighs like the world is crumbling. This is childhood in rural Victorian England. Forget picture books and toys. You're expected to be a little adult with little responsibilities, except with none of the praise, and definitely none of the wages. By now your feet are calloused from walking barefoot across gravel paths. Your chores are stacked up like firewood. Sweep the floor with a bundle of twigs, scatter chicken feed, pull weeds from the plot behind the house, then help your older sister scrub the pans with ashes from last night's fire. That's the soap. Ashes. It works, kind of, until it doesn't, and then you all just accept that the pan is seasoned. If you live near a farm, and let's face it, almost everyone does, you might also be sent to guard the cabbage patch. From what? Birds, rabbits, the occasional desperate neighbour. You're armed with a stick and a yell, and you sit on a broken stool in the cold watching a plot of struggling vegetables, wondering if they're even worth saving. Spoiler? They usually aren't. Some mornings you wake to frost and realise half the crop is already dead. You just sit there anyway, because it's what you were told to do. You don't ask questions, not unless you like the taste of backhand. The phrase child labour conjures up images of city factories, but rural child labour is its own particular misery. You work beside your parents from the moment you can lift, drag, or carry. Older kids might be out in the fields helping with harvests, hoeing soil, or trailing behind carts to gather the droppings of the horses and oxen. Why? Because manure means fertilised fields, and fertilised fields mean not starving. Every hand counts, even if it's only 3 feet tall and has jelly on it from breakfast. And when the harvest comes, oh, you're out there from dawn to dusk, stomping through wet earth, bending, lifting, bundling, and getting yelled at for doing it all wrong. Your back hurts, your hands bleed, and you lose a toenail to an unfortunate accident with a hoe. No one notices. You wrap it in rag and keep going. The ground is full of rocks and old bones. Sometimes you imagine the bones are from skeletons or ancient monsters. More likely they're just from a cow that died in 1812 and was never buried right. But it's fun to pretend when no one's looking. Here's a strange little detail you don't learn in school. In some rural areas, children were employed to scare crows for 12-hour shifts. Official job title: Scarecrow Boy. You'd climb onto a wooden stool in the middle of a field, flap your arms at anything with feathers, and make whooping sounds when you got bored. If it rained, you just got wet. If you fell asleep, the farmer docked your meagre penny wage or clipped your ear. Some kids had to wear burlap sacks with buttons sewn onto rattle when they moved. The goal wasn't comfort. It was being loud enough to spook a hungry bird. As a kid, you start developing survival tactics early. One of them is silence. You learn when to keep your mouth shut and when to nod. You figure out which adult might sneak you a crust of bread and which will cuff your head just for looking tired. You learn how to do things half right so they pass inspection. Perfection is a luxury. Your job is to get through the day without drawing too much attention. Attention often leads to punishment, and punishment leads to you limping for the rest of the week. School? That depends. There might be a dame school in the village, run by a widow who charges a penny a week to keep the youngest kids in one room while she teaches letters, using the back of a shovel or the soot on the wall. But you can't always go. Some days your parents need you at home. Other days there's no firewood for the school, so it closes. And even when it's open, the older boys just fight and swear, and the only book in the room is a Bible with the Psalms chewed up by mice. And you, being 5 or 6, aren't even at school age yet really. You're preschool. Which means the only education you get is from watching what not to do and who not to backtalk. Your big sister tried reading a verse out loud once and stammered on a long word. The schoolmaster cracked her knuckles so hard they bled. She didn't stammer again, but she also didn't return to school. Some historians argue that rural children were closer to nature and thus better off than their industrial city counterparts. But nature isn't your friend when you're ankle deep in mud, half-starved and surrounded by biting flies. Sure, you see a fox once in a while, or hear owls hoot across the fields. But those are passing details, not treasured memories. You're too busy picking nettles out of your socks and hoping the cows don't kick over the milk pail again. There are sweet moments, though. Your mother hums an old folk tune while she kneads bread. A travelling peddler gives you a pebble with a hole in it and swears it's fairy forged. You and a few other children sneak off to the stream and try to catch fish with your hands, splashing and laughing until someone falls in. You're soaked and in trouble, but for 15 glorious minutes you were just a kid. Not a worker, not a burden, just someone laughing in the water with your ribs showing and your hair tangled, but your heart light. At night, your chores done, you curl up on a bed of straw or a blanket on the floor near the hearth. You're bone-tired but too itchy to sleep. Fleas live in your clothes. Your brother talks in his sleep. The wind whistles through the cracks in the wall and something, maybe a rat, thumps in the corner. But your eyelids are heavy and you let yourself drift, knowing that tomorrow you'll do it all again. 'Cause out here, in the middle of nowhere, childhood isn't a phase. It's a crash course in endurance. The itching starts behind your ears. At first you think it's just the usual grime, dust from the yard, maybe some dried sweat from working the pastures, but then it spreads. Down your neck, into your scalp, all over your back like a whisper made of thorns. You try to ignore it. Everyone itches. Itching is part of life, but soon it becomes something more aggressive, a low-level agony that never quite lets you rest. When you finally get a look in the mirror, more like a warped shard of glass propped against a windowsill, you spot them. Lice. Tiny, scuttling, beige-grey monsters making a meal of your scalp. Your sister has them too. So does your father. Everyone, really. It's not something people talk about because there's no point. There's no solution, no shampoos, no delousing powder unless someone has a cousin who works for a doctor in town, and that's unlikely. So you do what most rural Victorians do. You grin, you scratch, and sometimes you shave everything off. Not for fashion, for survival. Head lice are only the beginning. There's also ringworm, a delightful fungal infection that gives you red circular patches on your skin, usually your arms or scalp. It looks like you've been branded by a drunk angel. It itches and burns and often leaves scars. No one really knows what causes it. Dirty things, probably. The midwife says it's from bad air and recommends a poultice of wet bread and coal dust. You try it once. You smell like toast and pain. It doesn't help. Then there's scabies, mites that burrow under your skin. Yes, under. You've scratched your wrist raw before someone points out the telltale lines like pencil trails just beneath your flesh. You get a bucket of cold water, a splash of vinegar, and a brush that looks suspiciously like it was meant for horses. Your mother scrubs you until your skin turns bright pink. You scream. She screams back. It's the only way. The thing is, hygiene is less of a concept and more of an aspiration. Bathing, when it happens, is a big deal. The water has to be boiled in the cauldron over the fire, poured into a tin tub, and used by everyone in the family. You are always the last one in, after your father, mother, older brothers and sisters. By the time it's your turn, the water is lukewarm at best, the colour of weak tea, and smells like a livestock barn. But you hold your breath and slide in, trying not to think about what's floating on the surface. You scrub yourself with a rag and a bar of lye soap so strong it might be stripping your skin off molecule by molecule. That burning sensation, that's clean, apparently. You come out red, raw, shivering, and barely less itchy than before. The lice are already planning their return. It's not just your body that suffers. Your clothes are a petri dish. You have exactly 2 shirts, one for the week and one that's been mended so many times it's more thread than fabric. Washing clothes means boiling them in a pot with ashes or a splash of vinegar, then hanging them out on a hedge to dry. You sometimes spot bugs crawling right back in while they hang there. You swat them away with a stick and pretend you didn't see it. And the hair? Combing is a rare event. There's only one comb in the entire house, and it's broken. 3 teeth are missing, and it once got stuck in your sister's curls so badly she cried for an hour. But it's all you have. You dip it in hot water, whisper a prayer, and rake it through your tangled mess of hair like you're ploughing a field. The comb gets passed around like a sacred relic. There's a little ceremony to it. Wipe it on your sleeve, hold it up to the light, check for lice, and pass it on. Here's a fun fringe fact. Some Victorian families hung a small cloth bag of camphor or lavender around a child's neck, believing it would ward off lice and disease. It smelled nice, sure, but mostly served as a signal to others that this child has bugs and we've given up. Others tried more desperate measures: kerosene, urine, crushed gooseberries. Whatever the neighbour said worked last year. One boy's aunt swears by boiled dock leaves. You try that too, now you smell like swamp salad. As you get older, you develop strategies. Scratching with a knitting needle, sleeping with your head wrapped in a damp cloth, stealing your father's shaving razor and taking your scalp down to stubble when no one's looking. The relief is brief, but it feels like heaven. A moment where your skin feels like yours again, and not some flea market for parasites. And it's not just the bugs that keep your skin crawling. There's also the rash you get from working in the hayloft. Hay rash is real. It's itchy, red, and spreads across your arms like a map of suffering. Your skin splits in the winter and peels in the summer. Blisters form from carrying buckets or chopping wood. You have calluses on your calluses, and don't even start on foot rot. Wet shoes, no socks, cold nights. It's a recipe for trench foot, even in peacetime. Even scholars get queasy talking about Victorian hygiene. Some argue rural people were closer to the earth, and therefore more natural, as if that's a good thing. Others point out that without any understanding of microbes or basic sanitation, even the best efforts were doomed from the start. The debate's ongoing. Were rural Victorians dirty by necessity or by culture? Maybe both. But one thing's certain. You can't smell history through a textbook, and that's probably a blessing. You start noticing how certain houses smell worse than others. Some have dogs, some have dead rats under the floorboards, some just smell like despair. Your own house has a sort of sour milk aroma you've grown used to. The worst is the church. Cold stone, mildew, damp cloaks, and the breath of 40 unwashed parishioners singing hymns in a minor key. You've nearly passed out during communion more than once. Despite all this, no one really complains. Not because they enjoy it, but because there's no alternative. You dream of being clean. You imagine a bath of warm water where you're not rushed or scrubbed with a horsebrush. You imagine soft linen, unchewed soap, and a bed without fleas. It feels like dreaming of the moon. Far away, glowing, but unreachable. So you wake each morning and scratch yourself awake. You pull on stiff clothes that haven't fully dried. You comb your hair with fingers that are already bleeding. You live with the itch, because the itch is your reality. It doesn't go away, you just learn to live beside it, like an unwelcome neighbour who'll never move out. You're about 7 when you first hear someone say the word school like it's a punishment. Up until now, you've assumed it's something only richer kids in town do, something with slates and desks and long-winded men in wigs. But no, apparently you might be going too. Not because anyone wants you to be smart exactly, but because the vicar's wife has decided the village needs moral instruction, and she's convinced the church hall would be better used for a few hours of discipline than it is storing broken pews and mice nests. So off you go, face half washed, hair combed with water and desperation, clutching a slate and a stub of chalk like they're precious metals. The schoolroom is a cold, echoing space that smells like mildew, candle wax, and wet wool. There's no real heat unless the fire's lit, and usually it isn't, unless the teacher wants to thaw out his ink pot. Your breath fogs in the air, and your fingers are so numb you can barely hold your slate. Welcome to education. You're one of about 20 children crammed onto hard wooden benches, ranging in age from 5 to 14. Some can barely count, others already know enough arithmetic to do the landlord's sums, which makes them practically royalty. The teacher is a man in his 50s, with spectacles perched halfway down his nose and a permanent scowl etched into his face like it was carved there by a chisel. He smells like pipe smoke and failure. His tools of the trade, a thick ruler, a strap, and a patience level measured in grains of sand. School, it turns out, is mostly repetition. You recite prayers, copy letters, and trace your name so many times you forget what it means. A is for apple, he says, even though you haven't seen an actual apple since last Michaelmas. Sometimes he calls you up to the front of the class, and if you stammer or get the sum wrong, the ruler makes a quick appearance, whack across the knuckles sharp enough to bring tears, but not loud enough for anyone to care. Your slate gets scratched beyond use within a week, and chalk becomes a kind of currency among the kids. The white sticks are swapped for bread crusts or marbles, or, once, a dead mouse someone insisted was lucky. You hoard a broken piece of chalk like it's treasure, and use the edge of your sleeve to wipe mistakes away, smearing a faint white dust across your clothes that never quite comes off. But not every day is school day. Sometimes you can't go because your father needs you to help in the fields, or your mother is too sick to fetch water, and it falls on you, or there's a frost so thick the cows are frozen into their stalls and no one can walk to the church without risking a shattered ankle. Absences are constant. No one expects perfect attendance. Education here is just another chore, competing with many others, and then there are the kids who never come back. They vanish from the benches without explanation. Some died, some moved, some got put to work, which usually means sent to labour in the next village, or given to an aunt with no children of her own and too many pigs to feed. Every week the class shrinks and stretches, like dough rising and falling. There's debate among modern scholars about how effective these early village schools really were. Some argue they gave rural children a crucial leg up, helping them escape cycles of poverty. Others point out that the quality of teaching varied wildly, and most of the learning was rote, focused on obedience rather than enlightenment. Either way, your handwriting improves slightly, and you can now read most of the signs around the village, even if they don't matter much, and you're not entirely sure what trespassers will be prosecuted really means. Girls' education is even more unpredictable. If you're a girl, you might get sent for a year or two to learn stitching and household scripture, a very polite way of saying how to scrub a floor and keep your mouth shut while doing it. Some girls excel at sewing and are sent to town to apprentice as seamstresses. Others get married at 15 and never read another word that isn't on a tin label. If you're lucky, you develop a fondness for reading. You borrow a copy of Pilgrim's Progress from the vicar's niece, or smuggle a half-burned almanac from a rubbish heap and hide it under your bed. You read by firelight, squinting until your eyes ache, turning the pages like they might fall apart in your hands. For a few minutes each night, you're not in a drafty, lice-ridden cottage. You're somewhere else entirely. Inside a book. Inside an idea. But not everyone is so lucky. Some of your classmates are half-starved and barely clothed, sent to school with bruises and empty stomachs. One boy has fits, what people now would call seizures, but he's just called touched in the head and left alone. Another girl can't hear well, and the teacher gives up on her entirely, letting her sit in the back and scribble nonsense just to keep her quiet. Here's a grim fringe fact for you. In some rural schools, children were made to memorize deathbed confessions of sinners as moral instruction. You sit there, 7 years old, reciting the final words of a man who murdered his wife or stole a pig and was hanged for it. Also, you'll learn not to misbehave. If it doesn't make sense to you now, it's fine. It never really made sense to the adults either. Still, you go back. Not because you love it, but because you're told to. Because sometimes there's a crust of bread at lunchtime, or a story about Julius Caesar, or a map of the world that shows places you've never heard of: India, the Arctic, Australia. These places might as well be on the moon, but the fact that they exist plants a seed in your brain. Maybe life isn't just mud and cold and shouting. Maybe there's more. You leave the schoolroom most days with a head full of half-remembered psalms and sums, your fingers ink-stained and sore and your stomach growling. But also sometimes, you walk home whispering words to yourself, big words, strange words, rolling them around on your tongue like they're magic spells. 'Cause maybe, just maybe they are. Your first tooth falls out in a mouthful of bread so hard it could have doubled as a building material. You don't even notice at first, just a crunch, a coppery tang, and then someone shouting, "You're bleeding!" You spit into your hand and there it is, one little tooth, ragged at the root, flecked with what might be mould from the bread crust. Everyone laughs. Losing teeth is normal, especially when your diet consists of starch, sugar, and whatever's been dried and stored since last harvest. The adult teeth come in soon enough, crooked and crowded, some already stained dark from the endless cups of weak tea and the total absence of fruit. You learn fast. Your mouth is not your friend. It's a battlefield, and the enemy always wins. By the time you're 12, your gums bleed if you bite anything harder than a boiled potato. Your breath carries that unmistakable Victorian tang, rot, tea, and what can only be described as barnyard adjacent. But no one comments. Everyone smells like that. The blacksmith's wife, your school teacher, the man who sells spoons out of a sack near the church, smile at any of them, and you'll get a look at some of the worst oral horrors Britain has ever produced. It's a common joke, in fact. You lose teeth like pennies down a well. By your 20s, you'll probably be half-gummed and gurgling your way through a bowl of mush. Now, there are dentists, technically, travelling ones usually, or tooth pullers who double as barbers or tanners. The tools they use are more suited for horses than humans. Forceps the size of pliers, bone-handled levers, and a mysterious hook you never want to see used twice. If you're lucky, there's a local woman who does teeth with fewer tools but considerably more alcohol. Her secret: a steady hand, a stiff drink, and the ability to ignore screaming. You first encounter one of these practitioners when your older brother gets an abscess. His cheek swells like someone shoved an apple in it, and he moans for 3 days straight, eyes rolling back whenever he tries to eat. The local tooth puller is called in, a red-faced man with a cart full of terrifying clanking things. No anaesthetic, of course, just a bottle of gin and someone to hold you down. You watch as your brother is pinned to a stool, mouth forced open, and then crack. The sound stays with you for weeks. He's lucky, though. He doesn't die of infection, which frankly could have gone either way. Tooth care in rural Victorian England is more superstition than science. You might rub your teeth with salt or a rag dipped in vinegar. Some people chew mint leaves or chalk. A few try baking soda if they've heard of it and can afford it. There's one man in your village who swears by burnt bread crusts as a tooth powder, but he's missing most of his molars and tends to drool when he talks, so the credibility is debatable. The real enemy is sugar, not the good kind. Not your modern sweet tooth, but raw, brown sugar sold in cones, hacked into chunks and mixed into everything from weak ale to the rare celebratory pudding. It's addictive, and cheap depending on how the trade ships are doing. You scrape the last bit from the bottom of a barrel sometimes and suck on it like it's gold. It's a treat, sure, but also a slow-acting poison for your teeth. You feel the ache the next morning and pretend not to. Here's a truly cursed little fringe fact. Some Victorians believed toothaches could be cured by wearing dead moles around their necks. Yes, moles. As in small, blind, velvety creatures pulled from the soil and tied like grim jewellery under your collarbone. They said it drew the pain away. Maybe it worked. Maybe you were just so distracted by the smell of decomposing mole that you forgot your jaw was throbbing. If a tooth rots, you don't fix it. You ignore it until it becomes unbearable. Then someone yanks it out. Fillings exist, technically, but not for people like you. Those are for rich Londoners with private physicians and imported novelties like chloroform and gold fillings. You get a sharp tug and a bloody rag to bite on. Maybe a sip of gin after if you're lucky. By the time you reach adolescence, your smile is a grim lineup of gaps, chips, and teeth gone grey or black. You start keeping your mouth closed in polite company. Not that anyone would judge. Your father's down to a single tooth and your grandmother whistles when she talks. But it's still a quiet shame, one you carry like a splinter under the tongue. Scholars still argue about just how bad Victorian dental health really was, especially in rural areas. Some suggest it wasn't as universally awful as stereotypes claim. After all, many people did make an effort to care for their teeth with what they had. Others argue it was much worse than we can imagine, especially for the poor, whose diets were limited and whose access to care was non-existent. Regardless, there's one thing everyone agrees on. If you're reading this now and have access to a toothbrush, you're already ahead of the game. And it's not just the pain, it's the infection. A bad tooth doesn't just sit in your mouth like a rotten stump. It spreads, it festers, it pushes up into your sinus or down into your jaw, and suddenly your face is swollen, your fever's climbing, and your odds of dying from something as simple as a molar infection just jumped significantly. No one knows the word sepsis yet, but they know the smell. That sweet, rotten scent that means someone's jawbone is decaying from the inside out. Some turn to folk remedies when the pain gets too much. A clove wedged against the gum, a hot brick wrapped in cloth and held to the cheek. One old man in your village swears by chewing on yarrow root while chanting a rhyme about St. Apollonia, the patron saint of dental suffering. You try it once. The root tastes like dirt and you forget the words halfway through the chant. Still, the pain goes away after 2 days. Probably not thanks to the rhyme, but you're not one to question results. What hurts more than the teeth, though, is the knowledge that they won't get better. Unlike a broken arm or a cut, a ruined tooth stays ruined. It's a countdown, and every year knocks another out. By your 20s, you'll be chewing with your gums. By your 40s, if you even make it that far, you'll be sipping broth and pretending it's stew. And yet you smile. Toothless, bloody, crooked, you still smile. Because pain is part of life, and your life never had a chance to be painless. You wake up sore, you go to bed sore, and in between you do your best not to let the rotting inside you show too much on the outside. You wake up hungry. That's not new. Hunger is your default setting, like damp clothes or sore feet. But this morning it gnaws a little harder than usual. Your stomach makes a sound like an old cupboard creaking open, and you press your hand against it as if that might quiet the noise. It doesn't. It never does. You dress slowly in the same itchy shirt and trousers you wore yesterday, and the day before that, and walk into the main room where your mother is stirring a pot over the fire. Whatever's inside smells faintly like boiled sock. Porridge, she says flatly, but it's a lie. It's water, oats, and hope. Mostly water. It's thin enough to drink, and that's how most of your meals go: slurp, swallow, hope it sticks. Food is survival, not pleasure. Every meal is a negotiation between what you want and what you have, and the answer is usually root vegetables, stale bread, and anything that hasn't gone green yet. Breakfast is gruel if you're lucky. Sometimes a crust with lard. Dinner, meaning the midday meal, is usually a bowl of boiled cabbage and potatoes. Supper is whatever's left. If it's a feast day, maybe there's a piece of boiled bacon, or, if your father managed to trap something, a stringy rabbit with more bones than meat. No seasoning, salt maybe. But spices are exotic things city people whisper about while you chew your turnip and dream of not chewing another turnip ever again. You learn to be creative. Bread is fried in grease and called pudding. Water is boiled with onion peels and called broth. A dried apple that survived the winter becomes dessert. You eat slowly, to trick your body into thinking there's more. You chew every bite as if it owes you money. Sometimes your family barters with the neighbours, some eggs for a jug of milk, or a jar of pickled beets for a chunk of cheese. If you're especially desperate, you trade labour for leftovers. You once spent a whole afternoon shoveling cow dung just to earn a heel of rye bread and a spoonful of dripping. It was the best meal you had all month. Meat is rare. So rare that when it appears, everyone stares at it for a moment in disbelief. On Christmas, if the pig survived the year without dropping dead or being stolen, your father might butcher it behind the house, hanging the carcass on a tree limb while you and your siblings gather around like it's a holy ritual. You remember the smell: blood, hay, cold air, and something thick and iron-like that made you both nauseous and ravenous. The bacon is salted, the sausage is stuffed, and every scrap is used. Even the trotters are boiled. You eat like kings for a week. Then it's back to rutabaga stew. Rats are a fact of life, not a delicacy. But there's an old man in your village who swears they're edible if you skin them right and roast them over oak. You're not that desperate. Yet. But you've seen children nibble roasted squirrel tails and dig up dandelion roots to fry in animal fat. The line between food and not food gets blurry when your ribs are poking out and the bread has maggots. And yes, the bread often has maggots. You just pick them out. Sometimes you don't bother. You tell yourself they're extra protein. You tell yourself anything that helps you swallow. Here's a fun little fringe fact. In some poorer rural homes, families used to bake loaves with iron nails in the dough. The theory was that as the bread baked, a bit of iron would leach into the food, preventing anemia. Did it work? Probably not. Did it give you weird tasting bread and chipped teeth? Absolutely. But it shows how inventive people became when medicine was expensive and dinner was uncertain. Your own family keeps a small garden out back, potatoes, onions, a few hardy greens. In a good year, it sustains you through autumn and into early winter. In a bad year, the potatoes rot in the ground and the cabbage gets eaten by slugs. And suddenly it's December, and you're boiling bark and calling it soup. You joke about eating mud, but sometimes you look at it and wonder how far off you really are. You've heard rumours of people in town who throw food away. Actual waste. Half-eaten pies, roasts, oranges peeled and discarded like they're nothing. You can't imagine it. You'd kill for an orange. You've never even tasted one. Sometimes a trader passes through with citrus in his cart, and the smell alone is enough to make you dizzy. You once licked a discarded peel you found in the mud. You tell no one. Markets are dangerous places, full of temptation and thieves. You've seen kids beaten for pocketing an apple. You've seen stalls selling offal, intestines, fish heads, and the occasional dodgy pie. You've seen people haggling over rotten eggs, pretending they're not rotten. You've watched dogs steal sausages right off tables and run into the alley, while a mob of children chases after them, hoping for a bite. Once, a neighbour's child choked on a coin hidden inside a piece of stolen pudding. She lived, but only barely. There's a constant debate among historians about just how malnourished rural Victorians were. Some say they fared better than their urban counterparts because of access to gardens, livestock and foraging. Others argue that with low wages, large families and unpredictable harvests, rural diets were often worse, more limited, less diverse, and heavily reliant on filler food. The truth, as always, sits somewhere in the middle of the cabbage patch. You don't think about nutrition, you think about calories, fuel. Will this bowl of parsnip mash give you the energy to fetch firewood and muck the stalls before dusk? Will it keep you from shaking in the cold? That's the bar you measure by. Taste is a luxury. Fullness is the goal. Still, there are moments. A blackberry you find along the hedgerow so ripe it stains your fingers. A hot scone on Easter Sunday, butter melting into the cracks. A hard candy someone brought from town that you suck for an hour, afraid to bite into it. These are the flashes that stay with you. The moments where your stomach isn't empty and the world isn't cruel. Because when life gives you so little, food isn't just fuel, it's memory, it's comfort, it's hope. Thin as broth, but still warm in your hands. You get dressed in the dark. There's no candle, and even if there were, you wouldn't waste it just to see your own misery reflected in your clothes. Your shirt is still damp from yesterday's rain, cold against your back like a slap from nature itself. The trousers are stiff from drying too close to the hearth. One leg slightly scorched, the other still smells like wet dog. You slip into them anyway, not because they fit, but because they're all you've got. It's the Victorian countryside, after all. Fashion hasn't arrived here yet, and when it does, it'll be wearing someone else's boots and smelling like boiled sheep. Speaking of boots, yours are a tragedy. Hand-me-downs from your cousin, who was half a foot shorter and had a limp that warped the sole. There's a hole in the left toe, so your sockless foot pokes out like a grub. When it rains, and it often does, your boot fills up and squelches with every step. You try to patch it with a bit of wax cloth and twine, but it never holds. So you walk around with a permanent chill in your toes and the faint sound of your dignity sloshing with every footfall. If you're a girl, the situation is somehow worse. Your dress is made of coarse wool that rubs your skin raw at the neck and armpits. It was dyed blue once. Now it's the colour of despair and chimney soot. The hem has been let down and stitched back up so many times it resembles a topographical map. Your petticoat, assuming you're lucky enough to have one, is patched in at least 4 places, and your corset, if you even get to wear one, is a second-hand monstrosity that laces unevenly and pinches like it's holding a grudge. Corsets in the countryside aren't for beauty. They're for structure, like scaffolding for a collapsing body. You wear one not to look elegant, but to keep your spine from folding while you bend over a wash basin or haul a sack of potatoes twice your weight. The tightness keeps your ribs in place and your stomach flat, which makes it harder to breathe but easier to shut up and work. You learn to suck in and smile through the dizziness. Underclothes are optional. Some days it's too cold to go without. Other days it's too wet to bother. Your one pair of long underwear might be hanging by the hearth, still soggy from wash day, so you go bare and pray the wind doesn't sneak up your hem and remind you of your vulnerability. Laundering clothes is a major production. You soak them in a mix of ash lye and water, scrub with a rock or wooden paddle, then rinse in the stream if the stream isn't frozen. Your knuckles split open from the cold, and the soap makes your hands burn for hours. But if you don't do it, the stink builds, and even the pigs start avoiding you. Everyone smells. It's a universal truth out here. Sweat, mildew, old wool, and something faintly sour. Your Sunday best is a slightly cleaner version of your weekday rags, and even then, you're expected to keep a stiff upper lip while your thighs chafe and your boots bite. The vicar once gave a sermon about the virtue of cleanliness, and your mother muttered under her breath, "He's never bathed his own drawers, has he?" Here's a strange little fringe detail. Some people in the countryside believe that wearing red flannel against the skin could prevent illness. So you might find yourself wrapped in a shirt dyed the shade of dried blood, convinced it'll protect you from catching the ague or bad humours. Does it work? Of course not. But at least it hides the stains. There's no such thing as a wardrobe. Clothes are folded sometimes, but mostly just draped over hooks or chairs or left in a corner until someone needs them. And you share everything. Your brother's shirt becomes your sister's nightgown. Your uncle's vest ends up on a child who doesn't even know what a vest is for. There's no embarrassment in it, just exhaustion. Clothes are tools, not statements, unless you count the statement, "I am cold, damp, and doing my best." Hats are sacred, though. A hat marks a person's place in the world. Your father wears a flat cap that smells like tobacco and sheep grease. Your mother ties her hair in a faded kerchief unless she's going to church, in which case she wrestles it into a bonnet that's been repaired so many times it looks like a papier-mâché project. If you're a boy, you might get your first real hat around 10, a soft, floppy thing that immediately blows off in the wind and lands in a ditch. You retrieve it, now soggy, and wear it proudly anyway. Shoes, when they exist, are a constant source of pain. Most are ill-fitting, made of thick leather that doesn't flex. Blisters turn into open sores. Socks, if you have any, are knitted from rough wool and often full of holes. Some children wrap their feet in rags. Others go barefoot for months at a time, even in winter. You've seen kids with blue toes and cracked heels so bad they can't walk without limping. No one calls it abuse. It's just life. Scholars sometimes argue that rural clothing in the Victorian period was practical and durable. That's the nice way of saying it was uncomfortable, ugly, and often made from whatever was cheapest. The wool was coarse and rarely dyed. Linen was saved for those who could afford more than one shirt. Lace, ruffles, buttons that matched. Those were city luxuries. Out here you fasten your coat with a safety pin and thank the heavens the sleeves are still attached. But there's pride too. Your mother mends every tear with hands worn from years of needlework. She embroiders a tiny flower at the hem of your apron, not for fashion, but as a secret message. I love you, even if the world doesn't. Your father patches his boots with leftover leather from a broken saddle. Your sister stitches her name into her scarf so no one can steal it without guilt. These small acts of defiance are your version of beauty. On Sundays, you dress your absolute best. You scrub your face raw, polish your boots with lard, and button your shirt all the way up, even if the collar chokes you a little. For one day, you walk like your clothes matter, like you're someone worth seeing. The vicar nods at you. The older girls glance your way. For a few hours, your patched-up body feels almost presentable. Then the rain starts. Your boots soak through. Your hat blows off. And just like that, you're back to the wet, itchy, grimy reality of the Victorian countryside. You tug your collar tighter and keep walking. It starts before dawn. A rooster you hate screams like it's auditioning for a tragedy, and the cold air crawls into your bones before you've even opened your eyes. Your back aches. Your hands throb. You fell asleep next to the hearth and woke up halfway under a table, mouth dry and legs tangled in your little brother's feet. No one says good morning. There's no time for that. You rise with the miserable discipline of someone who doesn't get to choose rest. Your first job of the day is hauling water, then mucking out the stalls, then chopping kindling with a hatchet that's older than you and just slightly sharper. All of this happens before you've had breakfast, which as always is a bowl of something grey and forgettable. After that, your day truly begins. Work isn't something you do, it's something you are. You're a labourer, even as a child, and unless a miracle occurs, say, your uncle dies and leaves you his wheelwright shop, you'll die a labourer too. If you're on a farm, your tasks shift with the seasons. Spring is planting, summer is weeding, autumn is harvest, and winter is everything that makes you wish you were ill, just to have an excuse to stop. But not all jobs are out in the field. Let's say you're old enough now, maybe 12 or 13, and you've been offered something new. Work in the local mill. It sounds better than the fields, but it's not. It's loud, dark, and full of dust. The spinning machines scream like angry ghosts, and the floor is always slick from oil and spilled grain. You keep your sleeves tight because if one gets caught, it pulls more than the cloth. You've seen it happen. 1 second a boy is feeding the loom, the next his arm is gone and the screams don't stop for hours. Or maybe you work in a mine, not coal, too posh for this corner of the countryside. Maybe tin or slate, crouching in tunnels so tight you can't stretch your legs for 8 hours straight. You carry buckets of rubble up a slippery incline, your fingers bleeding, your lungs full of something dark and permanent. There's a superstition that whistling underground angers the spirits, so no one makes a sound except for the occasional moan or cough. You come home coated in dust that never quite washes off. If you're really unlucky, you're sent to work as a thresher during harvest. That sounds innocent enough, but the flails are heavy and dangerous, and the dust kicks up into your throat until you can't speak without wheezing. You swing a stick for hours, breaking open grain while praying not to hit your own foot. The pay is half a loaf and maybe a coin if the farmer's feeling generous. He rarely is. And let's not forget chimney work. You've heard of boys, tiny ones, hired to crawl up into chimneys and sweep out the soot with stiff brushes. It's illegal in some parts, but that doesn't stop the desperate. You heard about a boy who got stuck halfway up and suffocated before anyone could get him out. They didn't retrieve the body, just bricked it up and started using the other chimney. If you're a girl, the jobs are just as awful, only quieter. You might be sent to a wealthier house in the village as a scullery maid, which is a fancy term for person who does everything no one else wants to. You wake before the household, scrub pans so black they reflect no light, and keep your eyes down at all times. The mistress might slap you for breathing too loudly or for dropping a spoon. You sleep on a pile of rags near the back door. You eat leftovers if there are any. Sometimes you get 1 day off a month, sometimes not. There's a disturbing little fringe fact that gets glossed over in the history books. Cider vats. Rural labourers often worked in cider production during apple season. It sounds charming, pressing apples into drink, but those massive wooden vats were notorious death traps. The fermenting cider produced enough carbon dioxide to suffocate anyone who leaned in too far. Every autumn, someone drowned silently in a barrel of cider fumes. 1 second you're checking the pulp, the next your face hits the juice and you never come back up. Work accidents are common and almost never reported. A crushed hand, wrap it in cloth and hope it stops bleeding. A broken rib, stay home for a day if you can afford to, then back to it. If you can walk, you can work. If you can stand, you can carry. If you can breathe, you're not dead. Yet. There are no workers' rights, no safety regulations, no off days. You work when you're sick. You work when you're bleeding, you work when you can't feel your fingers from the cold, and you do it with the knowledge that if you stop, someone else is waiting to take your place. There's always another hungry boy, another poor girl, another desperate body who'll do the job for less. Historians like to argue whether rural labourers had it better than factory workers in the cities. The cities had smog and endless hours, yes, but the countryside had isolation, poverty, and back-breaking physical toil. You're not just tired out here, you're worn down from the inside year after year until your back curves and your hands lock and your knees grind like rusted hinges. Fresh air doesn't help when your spine is shaped like a question mark, but for all the misery, there's a twisted kind of pride in your work. You know how to do things that others can't, how to tie a knot in one motion, how to lift a sack without splitting your back, how to spot a storm coming by the way the crows move. Your muscles remember the shape of a shovel, a scythe, a cart axle. You're not educated, not well fed, but you're skilled in the way that only survival can teach. At night you fall into bed, or floor or straw pile, with your hands blistered and your legs trembling. You dream about doing it all again tomorrow, because you will. There's no other path, no promotion, no retirement. You work until your body quits, or until you're buried behind the church with the rest of the poor souls who never made it out. Because out here, in the rotten heart of rural Victorian life, work doesn't just define you, it slowly destroys you. Sundays begin with stiff clothes and stiffer necks. You wake to the same cold draft curling around your toes, but today, instead of trudging into a field or hauling dung, you're expected to transform into a respectful, well-behaved Christian child. It doesn't matter that your shirt smells like smoke or that your one good pair of trousers has a rip in the knee. It's Sunday. You're going to church. God doesn't care about the rip, your mother says, but the vicar's wife certainly does. Before breakfast, you're already dreading it. Church isn't a joyful community celebration here. It's an obligation soaked in judgment and wooden pews that seem specifically designed to punish the human spine. The bells begin to toll through the valley as you button your collar all the way to your chin and pull on boots still damp from yesterday's snowmelt. You look presentable, if presentable means not actively covered in manure. That's the bar. The church sits at the top of a muddy hill just far enough away to make the walk miserable. Your family shuffles along in silence, save for your brother whining that his scarf smells like onions, and your mother occasionally smacking someone for dawdling. The villagers ahead of you form a procession of grey hunched figures, all dressed in their best attempts at dignity. You recognise their backs, their coughs, the way their boots strike the ground. Everyone does. You've known them since you were born. You know who will fidget, who will snore, who will burst into tears during the sermon for no reason. The church is cold. Always. Built from heavy stone and rarely heated, it smells of damp plaster, unwashed coats, and candle wax. You slide into your family's usual pew, worn smooth by decades of discomfort. Your thighs ache almost instantly. The pews are narrow, the back sharp. You're not meant to relax. You're meant to suffer quietly and be grateful for the opportunity. Then the sermon begins. The vicar is an older man with a voice like dry leaves rustling across a crypt. He reads from scripture with the energy of a man actively trying not to fall asleep. And yet, somehow, the content still manages to carry weight. It's always about sin. Your sins. The sins of children. The sins of women. The sins of everyone who doesn't tithe properly. Hellfire. Brimstone. The wrath of God. All served up before midday, like spiritual porridge designed to constipate the soul. You sit still because if you move, your father will dig his knuckles into your side. You try not to breathe loudly. You don't dare whisper. A girl behind you coughs, and her mother pinches her arm. A boy sneezes and is marched outside for discipline. You do your best to focus on the Bible verses, but your stomach is growling, your neck itches, and the man in front of you smells like turnips soaked in vinegar. Here's a strange but true little fringe fact. In some rural churches, families rented their pews, literally paid for the right to sit in a specific spot. The wealthier you were, the closer to the front. The poor sat at the back or stood. Your family sits somewhere in the middle, not quite scorned, not quite noticed. That's exactly where you prefer to be. Sometimes there's music. A cracked organ wheezes out hymns that no one sings with enthusiasm. You mouth the words without making a sound, just to keep the appearance of holiness. Your mother sings off-key. Your father sings like someone's threatening him. Occasionally, a choir of children sing something about lambs or blood, and everyone stares forward, pretending the lyrics aren't vaguely horrifying. After the sermon, there's a brief moment of tension. The offering. A wooden plate is passed around, and everyone pretends not to watch each other drop in coins, or not. Your mother always drops in something, even if it's a single farthing. Once your brother dropped in a button and got a stern talking to by the vicar's wife, who has the eyes of a hawk and the soul of a tax collector. Scholars debate how central religion really was to rural Victorian life. Some argue that the church was the backbone of the community, shaping morality, social order and education. Others claim most villagers viewed it as an obligation rather than a source of inspiration. The truth is probably both. The church is where you were baptized, where you'll be married, where they'll carry your body when you finally die of consumption or a poorly timed cow kick. It's always there, looming, silent, inescapable. Once the service ends, no one bolts for the door. That would be uncivilized. Instead, you wait, standing politely while the wealthiest families exit first. You nod to the vicar. You pretend you like the sermon, then you shuffle outside and breathe in the freezing air like it's a gift from heaven. But you're not free yet. There's the churchyard gauntlet. The vicar's wife stands near the gate, fishing for compliments and noting which children are wearing clean boots. The gossip begins the moment feet hit gravel. Whispers travel like wind. who looked ill, who was missing, who might be pregnant. If someone sneezed during the sermon, they're probably dying. If someone looked tired, they might be hiding a secret. You learn early that the churchyard is less a place of spiritual reflection and more a marketplace of rumours. Then there's Sunday school. You don't get to skip it. You're herded into a side room with other children and handed a miniature Bible, or sometimes just a sheet with verses printed on it. You recite psalms, you're asked questions. Who was Job? What happened to Lot's wife? Why shouldn't you covet thy neighbour's ox? You don't know what covet means, but you say the answer anyway. You get a halfpenny reward if you're especially clever, or a hymn book slapped across your knuckles if you're not. The best part of Sunday comes after all of this, when you finally go home and sit down for the week's most decent meal, maybe a stew, maybe a small roast if your family's saved up. It's never enough, but it's warm, and you eat it slowly, savouring the moment. Then your father falls asleep in his chair, your mother knits by the fire, and you sit in silence, not because you're peaceful, but because no one has the energy to speak. You'd think Sunday would be restful, a day of peace, but it isn't. It's a performance, a chore dressed in its finest apron, a reminder that God is watching, even when you're cold, itchy, bored, and starving. You fall asleep that night with a prayer in your head, something between gratitude and begging. Love doesn't arrive in the countryside with fanfare or flowers. It slinks in quietly, somewhere between a shared chore and a sideways glance in the hayfield. If you're waiting for roses, sonnets, or dramatic declarations of passion, you're going to be disappointed. Romance here is a luxury no one can afford, like clean water or privacy. You don't fall in love so much as stumble into it, usually muddy and confused, with half your teeth missing and your future already decided by someone else. Courtship, such as it is, happens under the watchful eyes of everyone. Villages are small and secrets are impossible. If you talk to someone twice in the same week, you're interested. 3 times, and the neighbours are already imagining your wedding and speculating how many children you'll have before you both keel over. Your mother will raise an eyebrow. Your father might grunt in vague approval. If you're really unlucky, your aunt will start crocheting you matching pillowcases before you've even held hands. There's no dating, not in the way you're probably imagining it. There are no long walks through candlelit gardens. There are no getting to know each other talks over tea. What you get is proximity and practicality. You fetch water at the same time. You pass each other on the way to the mill. You maybe, talk at the fair, surrounded by the scent of manure and meat pies. And if you're bold, you sit next to them at church, a full inch closer than necessary. That's flirting in rural Victorian England. Subtle disobedience and the faintest hint of a smile. You meet someone. Let's say his name is Thomas. He's not the handsomest in the village. One ear is a little higher than the other, but he has 2 working boots and knows how to string a rabbit snare. That puts him solidly in the top third of eligible bachelors. He helps his father repair carts, smells like sawdust most days, and once you caught him feeding a biscuit to a stray dog behind the chapel. That counts for more than good teeth. Or maybe you're Thomas. You've noticed Mary, 3rd daughter of the Carter family, quiet, practical and quick with her hands. She sings when she thinks no one's listening. She stitched the same apron 3 times and still makes it look presentable. You don't exactly know how to say you like her, so you offer to carry her water bucket one day. She lets you. That's a yes. Courting involves very few words and a lot of awkward silence. You might be allowed to walk someone home after church, just not too close, and definitely not through the woods. That's how babies happen. You're allowed to bring a gift if it's food, something you baked or stole or traded for. A bruised apple is practically a proposal, a scrap of ribbon, a declaration of war on her father's patience. Every interaction is a gamble. You can't afford to waste time on a match that won't work and the whole village is watching for signs. A touch on the arm. A smile held a second too long. Even if you don't mean anything by it, the rumour mill does, and once your names are linked, breaking it off becomes a scandal. So most people just go with the current. You're already expected to marry someone from the village, probably someone your family's known forever. Maybe even a cousin. Not too close a cousin, hopefully, but the options are limited. There's a phrase you hear often. A good match. It doesn't mean love. It means land or tools or a shared cow. A good match is someone who won't starve you. Someone who can help you raise children without dying too early. Your heart is a secondary concern. Practicality rules everything. Compatibility is measured in work ethic and the ability to survive a harsh winter without complaining too much. Here's a fringe fact that makes modern hearts shudder. In some rural communities, parents arrange courtships the same way they arrange livestock trades. A pig for a daughter, a few acres for a willing son. You might laugh, but that pig could feed a family through February. Emotion is a risk. Pigs are reliable. And yet sometimes love sneaks in anyway. Maybe you're working together on harvest day, and he slips you the choicest apple from the tree. Maybe she stitches your name into a handkerchief and pretends it was just an accident. Maybe your hands brush in the barn and neither of you pulls away fast enough. Those are the moments that matter. Brief, quiet flashes of rebellion against the grey monotony of survival. There's danger too. A kiss stolen in the woods can lead to more, and more can lead to trouble. If a girl ends up in the family way without a ring on her finger, her life is all but over. She becomes gossip fodder, a walking cautionary tale, a servant to some distant relative until the child is born and quietly placed elsewhere. The father, if he's around, may be forced to marry her, usually grudgingly, or may vanish entirely. Shame is a currency, and it's mostly spent on women. Some couples run, they leave for the city, looking for anonymity, work, anything but the stifling certainty of village life. Most return within months, penniless, sick, and more hopeless than when they left. A few succeed, vanish into the fog, and become ghost stories parents tell to other young lovers. Don't be like them. Stay put. Be sensible. Scholars still argue over how much romance factored into rural Victorian marriages. Some believe love was irrelevant, a byproduct at best. Others think it survived quietly in the background, in shared chores, exchanged glances, and the gentle kindness that grows over years of weathering life together. Maybe both are true. Maybe love doesn't bloom big and bright here. It's too windy for that. Maybe it's a stubborn little weed, growing between the cracks of your day, hanging on no matter how many times you forget to water it. Eventually, whether by pressure, necessity, or genuine affection you marry, there's no fanfare. A simple ceremony in the church, a new apron, a second-hand suit, maybe a meat pie if your families have saved up. You don't get a honeymoon, you get chores, you move into a cottage that looks like every other, and you start a life that looks exactly like the one you grew up in. But on some nights, when the chores are done and the fire is warm, you sit next to the person you chose, or were given, and they reach out, take your hand, and squeeze it just once. And maybe in that squeeze you feel something real. The wedding was simple, one quick ceremony, 3 hymns sung through cracked lips, and a stale fruitcake that had been passed around more times than anyone could count. Now you're married, and within hours, all the mystery and anticipation collapses into something that feels more like a work contract than the start of anything beautiful. You're not just joined together, you're merged, like 2 overworked oxen tied to the same yoke, trudging through the same mud toward the same grim destination. If you're the bride, you move into your husband's family home, which is a generous way of saying you squeeze into the already crowded cottage, where his parents, his 2 unmarried brothers, and a baby with a cough that sounds like the end of all things currently live. There's no such thing as privacy. Not for conversations, not for arguments, and certainly not for what happens, or doesn't happen, on your wedding night. If you're lucky, the curtain around the bed stays up and the children stay asleep. If you're not, someone snores through the entire awkward ordeal. There is no honeymoon, no romantic getaway. You don't travel because no one here travels unless they're fleeing something or being buried. You wake up the next morning and do what you've always done. Only now there's someone beside you, breathing heavily, taking up half the blanket and most of the room. If you're a woman, your workload doubles overnight. You're now responsible for cooking, washing, mending, nursing, and pretending you're happy about it. If you're a man, you now have one more mouth to feed, and maybe, if the church is feeling generous, a few extra stares of approval when you show up on Sunday with a wife in tow. Marriage is not the end of your struggles. It's a multiplication. Your lives are tied together, yes, but mostly in the way 2 donkeys are tied to the same broken cart. You pull, you stumble, you curse under your breath, and you hope the wheels don't fall off before winter sets in. And the in-laws? Oh, they're delightful. His mother watches your every move, clucks her tongue if the broth is too thin, and rearranges your laundry pile just to assert dominance. His brothers take up space, eat like pigs, and leave their boots wherever you're most likely to trip on them. If you so much as sigh too loudly, someone mutters about young wives these days, and suddenly you're being told how your mother kept house, as if you didn't come from the exact same rut-stained village with the same leaking roofs and the same lice-riddled bedding. If you're a man, you probably feel the walls closing in too. You're not the head of the household yet. That honour still belongs to your father, whose word is law and whose temper is inversely proportional to how much ale he's consumed. Your wife looks at you like she expects something. Tenderness, wisdom, possibly dinner. But you have no tenderness left. Only blisters. Only aching muscles and barely a penny in your pocket. You want to give her something more, maybe even love her properly, but you've got 2 pigs to clean, a fence to mend, and a field full of dying cabbages. Children come quickly. Too quickly, in fact. The first is usually conceived before the last wedding hymn has faded into memory. There's no birth control, not really. Rumours of sheep bladder sheaths and herbal teas exist, but they're expensive, unreliable, or condemned by the church. So the babies come, and come, and come. Your body becomes a calendar. 9 months on, a few weeks off, and then it starts again. If you're the wife, your spine bends, your stomach never quite recovers, and you learn to carry pain like it's a child in your arms, constant, inconvenient, and always crying. You start to forget what silence sounds like. Between the baby's howling, your husband's coughing, and the general din of a house packed with people and livestock, your ears never stop ringing. Nights are restless. Days are worse. You learn to work while breastfeeding, while bleeding, while dizzy from hunger. You don't stop. You're not allowed to. Marriage gave you a new role, but not a softer life. No one gets softness here. And the fights? Oh, they happen. You snap over spilled water, you shout over burned bread, you argue in hisses because anything louder brings the whole family in like wolves sniffing blood. There are no private arguments. There are only family debates, village gossip, and the growing fear that maybe you married someone you don't actually like very much. Still, divorce is not an option. Not for the rural poor. It's expensive, scandalous, and practically unthinkable, unless someone commits outright murder or runs off with a travelling magician. You stay. You endure. You grit your teeth when he drinks too much and slurs insults he'll pretend not to remember. You hold your tongue when she cries into her apron and calls you useless. Love becomes something whispered between chores, if it exists at all. Some scholars argue that marriages among the rural working class were more cooperative than affectionate, that couples formed partnerships based on survival, not sentiment. And there's some truth in that. You rely on each other the way broken shutters rely on rusted hinges. Neither ideal, both necessary. But other accounts suggest tenderness did exist in pockets. A hand held under the table, a laugh shared during a walk home from church, a kiss on the forehead that no one sees. Here's a strange historical quirk. In some villages, it was customary for newlyweds to parade through the streets with a wooden spoon and a ladle tied together, symbolising their new domestic duties. Romantic, in the way a livestock auction is romantic. But hey, at least it's tradition. You mark your days with routines now, shared chores, shared meals, shared exhaustion. You don't need to talk much. You know each other's silences. You finish each other's sentences, mostly because there's only so many ways to say, "Did you feed the chickens?" Or "We're out of soap again." The honeymoon, if it ever existed, was lost somewhere between the latrine and the pig pen. And yet somehow there are moments when he rubs your shoulders without being asked. When she brings you a biscuit she saved from market. When you both laugh at something the baby did, and for 1 minute the cottage feels like home and not just another room you'll eventually die in. The moments are small, but they're yours. Because in this place, marriage isn't magic. It's mud and mending. It's surviving together when the world keeps trying to split you apart. You barely have time to notice you're pregnant before the symptoms begin. Not that you're surprised, it's what happens. You get married, you get to work, and you start producing children like a one-woman factory. There's no test, no quiet moment of revelation, just a missed period, a queasy stomach, and a knowing look from your mother-in-law when you can't keep down your morning porridge. Again, she says, not unkindly, just matter of fact. You nod and get back to kneading bread. Pregnancy is not a celebrated state in your world. It's expected. Routine. You don't glow. You groan. You carry on with the same workload as before, feeding livestock, hauling water, chopping kindling. There's no midwife fussing over you with herbal teas and soft linens, no doctor checking in. You're lucky if the village midwife even shows up when the time comes, especially if she's halfway into a bottle or occupied with someone else's breech birth. And she's not exactly gentle. She's got strong hands, blunt words, and the kind of knowledge you only earn by losing a few along the way. Your belly grows, your ankles swell, and the pain becomes a permanent companion. The baby kicks hard, turning your insides into a bruised mess. You're tired, hungry, aching, but you still chop onions with one hand and swat flies with the other. No one tells you to rest. Rest is for corpses. And then comes the birth. You try not to scream too loudly because your husband's brothers are sleeping in the next room and you don't want them wandering in for a look. The midwife arrives, sweating and out of breath. With a bottle of gin and a belt of herbs, she claims keep away spirits. You bite on a strip of cloth. The pain is unspeakable, blinding. There is no position that helps, no word that soothes, just hours of agony that stretch into something timeless and raw. Finally the child arrives, a wet, howling creature that looks more frog than human. It's quickly swaddled in a scratchy rag and handed off while the midwife inspects the damage. You feel torn open, hollowed out, but the baby's alive. That alone is a miracle. Now comes the hard part, because childbirth is only the beginning. Infant mortality hangs over you like a thundercloud. There's a good chance your baby won't live past the week, maybe not even the day. You don't name them right away, you've learned not to. Your neighbour lost 2 before they even reached 6 months, one to the grip, the other to what they called the wasting. No one knows what these illnesses are. They just arrive like fog and steal your child without explanation. Your baby cries constantly. That's a good sign, you're told. Better than the ones who never make a sound. You feed them when you can, breast milk mostly, but if you're too weak or your milk dries up, you'll soak stale bread in ale or milk and squeeze it into the baby's mouth. It's not ideal. It might kill them, but it might also keep them alive. Those are the choices. You rock them near the fire, bouncing them gently while your body still bleeds. Your muscles spasm, and your head throbs from sleeplessness. Your husband sleeps soundly through most nights, snoring like a freight wagon stuck in the mud. You envy him. Not because he doesn't care, but because he can sleep. If the baby lives, you're rewarded with more work. Constant feeding, cleaning, burping, changing. There are no nappies, just strips of cloth washed and reused until they fall apart. No cradle either, just a wooden drawer lined with hay and an old towel. The baby shares your bed. Not for closeness, but because there's nowhere else to put them. You're terrified of rolling over on them in the night. That happens, more often than anyone admits. The smell of milk, bile and sweat becomes your perfume. You wash when you can, rarely, and sleep when the baby sleeps, which means never. Your back aches. Your breasts are sore and leaking. You get dizzy sometimes, but you brush it off. There's no room for illness. The older kids still need feeding, the pig still needs slopping, and someone's torn the only dry shirt on the woodpile again. Your neighbours help occasionally. A visiting aunt might hold the baby while you scrub the floor. An older cousin might bring you a leftover heel of bread. But everyone has their own children, their own burdens. No one is truly free to help. You manage as best you can. Here's a dark little fringe fact. In some rural areas, people made sleeping potions for infants, mixes of poppy syrup, gin or laudanum to quiet a fussy baby. It wasn't considered abuse, it was survival. A crying baby could mean no sleep, and no sleep could mean slipping while chopping wood, or forgetting to bar the door or falling into the fire. But sometimes the dose was too much, and the baby simply never woke up. They called it crib death. You don't touch the stuff, but you've thought about it more than once. When the baby falls sick, because they always do, it starts small. A fever, a cough, a strange rash. You panic, but no one else does. The midwife says, "It's just teething." Your mother-in-law says, "It's the cold in their bones." You wrap the baby tighter and rock them until your arms give out. Sometimes they recover, sometimes they don't. If they die, there's no ceremony. Just a small wooden box your husband carves in silence, and a patch of earth behind the chapel. No marker, just a stone and your memory. You cry once, maybe twice, then get back to work. There's still laundry to do, the fire's nearly out, and another child is already on the way. Some historians claim that mothers in Victorian England grew numb to child death, that they became emotionally distant to cope with the frequent losses. Maybe that's true for some, but for you, each death slices you open. You carry their names, if you gave them any, inside your ribs like forgotten prayers. You remember the weight of them in your arms, even after they're gone, and each time you feel a flutter in your belly, you hope against hope that this one will live. but you never truly expect it. Because motherhood here isn't a joy, it's a gamble. A repetitive, exhausting, often tragic gamble, where the odds are against you and the stakes are everything. The first time you see a leech in action, you gag. It's fat, shiny, and squirming across the bloated leg of a man who looks half dead already. The apothecary slaps it on like he's past the point of caring, says something about drawing out the bad blood, and steps back to watch it suck. You stare in horror, wondering if this counts as medicine. It does. Congratulations, you're living in an age where illness is treated with guesses, folklore, and creatures that belong in nightmares. There's no doctor in your village, not a proper one. The nearest physician lives 2 towns away and only bothers to visit when someone rich is dying, and the family is dangling a few gold sovereigns to sweeten the ride. For everyone else, it's home remedies, travelling quacks, and the old woman with a drawer full of dried roots and a bottle labelled miracle tonic that smells suspiciously like wood polish. When you fall ill, you go to your mother, or your neighbour, or sometimes just deal with it on your own. Got a headache? Tie a cold cloth around your forehead and sit in the dark. Sore throat? Gargle with vinegar and salt, or suck on a boiled onion. Sprained ankle? Wrap it in cabbage leaves and hope it heals straight. If it doesn't, well, now you walk funny. That's just life. Fever is feared most. People whisper when someone starts sweating and shaking, especially if the eyes roll or the skin turns blotchy. Could be typhus, could be the ague, could be a chill that'll pass or the first step toward the grave. You'll know in a few days, maybe. No one calls the doctor unless someone's actually turning blue or coughing up blood. Most of the time, by the time help arrives, the patient's either improving or dead. Either way, there's little to be done. The midwife doubles as the village healer, but she's not trained, not in any official sense. Her knowledge is passed down orally, a tangle of Latin-sounding herb names and tales about full moons and owl sightings. She believes in poultices, pressure points, and the power of prayer. Some of it works, some of it's nonsense. You let her smear mustard paste on your chest once when your lungs wouldn't stop rattling. You screamed from the burn, but you did stop coughing eventually. Coincidence? Magic? Who knows? Then there's the local apothecary, a man who reeks of camphor and barely blinks. His shelves are lined with jars, pickled things, dried things, powdery things that look like they belong in a spell book. He has cures for everything: worms, melancholy, constipation, even heartbreak. He once sold a young girl a vial of elixir for courage that turned out to be gin mixed with crushed mint. She did feel braver, until she passed out in a puddle. Real medicine is expensive, rare, and sometimes worse than the illness. There's laudanum, a godsend and a curse. Opium dissolved in alcohol, sold for pennies and prescribed for everything from toothaches to night terrors. It works. It numbs pain, quiets crying babies, lulls grieving mothers to sleep, but it's addictive. You've seen men waste away on it, their minds hollowed out like old tree trunks, still smiling as their teeth fall out. Bleeding is still in fashion. A bad mood? You've got too much blood. Joint pain? Too much blood. Persistent cough? Clearly your humours are unbalanced, and a few ounces of blood will fix that. A barber with a dirty blade opens a vein in your arm and collects your precious life force in a bowl, watching it slosh like soup. You leave light-headed, pale, and, according to them, cured. One of the more bizarre beliefs you've heard is about sheep dung. No, really. Someone swears by boiling it in water to treat everything from infections to childbirth cramps. You're not brave enough to try it, but you know someone who did. He lived. Maybe because of the dung. Maybe in spite of it. And then there's surgery. Rural surgery, if it happens at all, is done in a kitchen on a table with a bottle of gin and someone to hold you down. An infected limb? Off it comes. Cauterized with a hot poker while you scream so hard you nearly rupture something. There's no antiseptic. No anesthesia beyond alcohol or unconsciousness. You either survive or you don't, but you'll definitely wish you hadn't for a while. Modern historians debate how effective folk medicine truly was. Some argue that herbal knowledge and practical remedies helped more people than we give credit for. Others claim it was mostly trial and error, with emphasis on the error. Either way, you live in a time where the line between healer and butcher is frighteningly thin, and where the word recovery just means you didn't die yet. Mental illness isn't discussed. Not seriously. If you start talking to yourself or stop eating or sit by the fire staring into the middle distance for days at a time, people say you're melancholic or touched. Sometimes they pray for you. Sometimes they avoid you. If you get worse, violent, unpredictable, you might be sent to an asylum, which is a polite term for an underfunded, overcrowded warehouse of suffering. You've heard stories about the 1-3 towns over, chains, cold baths, screaming in the night. No one comes back better. Women's health is a mystery wrapped in fear. Your monthly bleeding is called the curse and treated with suspicion. Pregnancy is sacred and terrifying. Miscarriages are common, dangerous, and often blamed on climbing stairs too fast or looking at someone crooked. One woman claimed her miscarriage came after seeing a fox in the daytime. No one argued. No one ever argues about foxes. Even common ailments are a risk. A bad tooth can lead to sepsis. A scratch from a rusty nail can go red, then purple, then black. A fever might mean death by morning. You live every day knowing that the smallest misstep, a cough, a blister, a chill, can tip the scale toward the grave. And yet somehow people keep surviving. Not all of them, but enough. You see neighbours recover from wounds that should have killed them. Children bounce back from fevers that turn their lips blue. Old women shrug off broken hips and still make it to church. Maybe it's luck. Maybe it's stubbornness. Maybe it's sheer, dumb refusal to give in. You keep a few things under your bed. A clove of garlic, a pouch of salt, a string tied in a protective knot. You don't believe in magic. Not really. But then again, you don't not believe either. Because in a world where medicine is half guesswork and half desperation, even the strangest remedy might be the one that saves you. Home, sweet outhouse. You don't have much, but you do have 4 walls and a roof. Or most of a roof, depending on the last storm. Your cottage leans slightly to one side, like it's just as tired as the people living inside it. Made from stone, timber, and sheer stubbornness, it sits on a patch of earth that's either mud or dust, depending on the season. Ivy creeps in through the cracks in the wall, moss grows along the baseboards, and something definitely died under the floorboards last spring. No one could find it, but the smell hung around for weeks like an unwanted guest. You step inside and are immediately hit with the usual cocktail of smells: smoke, damp wool, stale milk, soot, and whatever's cooking, probably cabbage. There's only one room downstairs and everything happens in it. Meals, chores, births, deaths. If you're lucky, there's a loft above for sleeping, though the ladder up to it wobbles and has a few missing rungs. If you're not lucky, your bed is in the corner by the fireplace, which means you get to sleep in flickering light with ash settling gently on your face like snow. The fireplace is the heart of the house, not in a cosy, gather round and tell stories way, more in a don't let it go out or we'll all freeze and die way. It's where you cook, dry clothes, burn letters from people you hate, and occasionally incinerate a mouse by accident. The chimney doesn't draw properly, so smoke hangs in the air, coating every surface and every lung. You develop a cough early and keep it for life. It's not a symptom, it's just the sound your house makes through you. The furniture is sparse and mostly inherited. A table that wobbles. 3 chairs, one of which has a broken leg and has to be propped up with a brick. A battered cupboard with a single functioning hinge. Everything is covered in a thin layer of soot no matter how often you wipe it. The floor is either dirt or stone, depending on where you live and how wealthy your great-great-grandfather was when he built the place. Rugs? Maybe one, maybe none. And even then it's more holes than fabric. The beds are straw-stuffed sacks that creak and crunch every time someone shifts. They attract all the worst things: lice, fleas, rats. You've woken up more than once to find a beetle on your pillow, or a mouse stealing crumbs from your sleeve. You swat, hiss, curse, and go back to sleep, because what else are you going to do? Your walls are papered with grime and, if you're fancy, actual paper. Pages torn from old books or newspapers pasted up with flour glue. Some folks whitewash the walls, but the effect lasts about a week before the smoke turns everything a sickly beige again. Mould blooms in the corners like Gothic wallpaper. You try not to touch it. You try not to breathe too deeply. Now let's talk about the outhouse, or, as you know it, the necessary. It's a lean-to in the back, about 10 steps from the door, more if you're dodging puddles or chickens. It's just a wooden seat over a pit, and the pit is your problem. You dig it deeper when it fills. You move it entirely if it overflows. It's an art, really. In winter, it's a nightmare of cold wind and frozen splinters. In summer, the smell could knock out a cow. Everyone knows not to lean back while sitting. That's a mistake you only make once. Toilet paper, number. You use whatever's at hand. Newspaper if you're lucky, corn husks if you're not, or just a smooth stone kept in a bucket of water. Sanitary it is not. The plague of flies that swarms the outhouse door during warm months becomes a kind of minor deity in your life. Ever present, impossible to ignore, and occasionally feared. Washing happens in a tin basin, with water you haul from the well and heat over the fire. Bath night is a full production. The eldest go first, the youngest go last, often in water that could legally be classified as soup. You scrub with lye soap that burns like betrayal, and afterward you feel slightly cleaner but still smell like goat. There's a single window in the cottage, maybe two if you live in what your neighbours call the good end of the village. The panes are wavy and warped, and in winter frost creeps across them in delicate, deadly patterns. The light that filters through is weak and dusty, more of a suggestion than illumination. You make do with candles or rushlights, dipped in tallow and stuck in broken bottles. Storage space is a joke. Every spare inch is packed with tools, crates, preserves and mystery piles that no one wants to claim responsibility for. You hang clothes from rafters, stack pots under the bed, and stuff spare shoes into cracks in the wall. You have one drawer for everything important: marriage certificate, birth tokens, a rusty needle, 3 buttons, and a bit of twine you're convinced will come in handy one day. Here's a quirky little fringe fact. In some villages, it was believed that building a small alcove or witch hole into the chimney would ward off evil spirits. A tiny nook near the hearth where a charm or amulet could be placed. You have one. Your grandmother stuffed it with lavender and an old brass button. You don't touch it, just in case. Rats are a given. Mice too. You hear them at night scampering across the rafters, gnawing at the walls. Cats help, but they can't be everywhere. Sometimes you wake to the sounds of a scuffle in the dark and pray it's just the dog chasing shadows. You decorate where you can, a flower in a cracked cup, a dried herb bundle hanging from the beam, a torn bit of lace on the mantel. They don't make the house feel grand, but they make it yours. You notice these details more when you're tired, when the house is quiet, when the fire has burned down and you're curled up with a blanket that smells faintly of wet hay, wondering if you'll ever live somewhere with clean walls and a door that shuts without argument. Historians love to point out how quaint rural cottages look in paintings, but they never mention the mildew, the mice, the cold that seeps up through the floor and into your spine. Charming, they say. They've clearly never had to brush a centipede off their pillow or break the ice in their wash basin with a hammer. Still, it's home. Your little crooked box of barely contained chaos. It's where you laugh, cry, bleed, scream, sleep, love, and sometimes pray. When you remember how. It's where life begins, ends, and everything in between tries not to collapse through the floorboards. It might be rotting, but it's yours. There are no secrets in the village. Not really. Not when every window creaks, every floorboard groans, and every neighbour knows the sound of your front door better than you do. You live elbow to elbow with people who've known your family for generations, who remember when your mother was born, when your uncle ran off to sea, and when you lost that tooth on the church steps. They remember everything, and they talk. Oh, do they talk? Gossip is the village's second language. It floats through the air like chimney smoke, thin, inescapable, and impossible to scrub out once it settles. It starts in the bread queue, travels through the blacksmith shop, detours past the well and always ends up by the church gate, where the widows gather like crows to pick over the newest sins. No one's safe, not you, not the vicar, not the cow with the crooked leg who may or may not be cursed, depending on which neighbour you ask. You learn early how to listen without being caught. There's an art to it. You keep your eyes down, your hands busy, and your ears wide open. You pick up everything. Who's behind on their rent, who's in trouble, who's got a cousin visiting that no one's ever met and who mysteriously wears trousers that aren't patched. That last bit alone will keep tongues wagging for a week. But listening is only half the game. Sooner or later, you talk too. Because staying silent makes you suspicious. You learn how to phrase things just so, how to say, "Well, I heard," and raise your eyebrows like you're reluctantly revealing a sacred truth. You never claim to know. That's dangerous. You simply pass it along. A relay runner in a race no one wants to admit they're running. The walls have ears, they say. But in your village, so do the trees, the sheep, and the bread ovens. You once sneezed during a whispered conversation behind the barn, and 2 hours later your aunt asked if you were getting the fever like young Clara. Clara had the fever 3 weeks ago. That's how fast it moves. Some gossip is harmless. Little things. A chicken that laid an egg shaped like a pear. The shoemaker's apprentice getting caught singing to himself while fixing a boot. Your cousin being seen walking with someone he definitely isn't betrothed to. That sort of thing keeps the day moving. It's entertainment, really. The countryside doesn't offer much else besides weather and livestock. But other gossip? It's weaponized. A rumour in the wrong place at the wrong time can ruin someone. You've seen it happen. A woman loses a baby, and suddenly the whispers start. Maybe she didn't want it. Maybe she did something. A man's cow dies mysteriously, and now half the village is convinced his neighbour hexed it. Old men cross themselves when they pass the house, and children throw pebbles at the windows just to see if the devil will look out. Here's a strange, if not totally surprising, fringe fact. In some rural villages, people kept witch bottles buried beneath doorways to protect themselves from malicious gossip. Literal glass bottles filled with hair, nails and pins designed to trap evil intentions. You think it's ridiculous, but then again, you've considered making one. It's worse for women, of course. It always is. A man can drink, swear and stumble out of the alehouse with his pants half undone, and people will just shake their heads. Boys will be boys. But if a woman walks home alone after dark, someone starts spinning tales. If she's unmarried past 25, they assume she's either barren, cursed, or peculiar. If she's too pretty, she must be tempting someone's husband. If she's not pretty enough, she's obviously jealous and plotting something foul. You try not to care what people say. You tell yourself it doesn't matter. But you still fix your hair before leaving the house. You still smile politely when the butcher's wife glares at you for reasons you'll never understand. You still lie awake at night wondering if the comment you made at the market about the size of the parsnips was interpreted as some kind of insult. And once you're on the other side of the whispers, once you become the subject instead of the spectator, it changes everything. A cousin of yours, Martha, caught the attention of a travelling peddler. He gave her a ribbon. She smiled at him. They disappeared behind a hedgerow for 20 minutes. By nightfall, the whole village had her pregnant with twins and exiled to a convent. She's still here, still unmarried, and still gets the side eye every time she goes to fetch milk. Some try to fight the gossip, a bold word, a slammed door, a cold stare that says, "I heard what you said and I don't care." But those responses just feed the fire. "Did you see the way she looked at me?" someone says, and just like that, it starts again. The only true defence is indifference, or total invisibility. There are moments when the gossip turns deadly serious. Someone accuses someone else of theft or blasphemy or worse. You've heard stories of men being chased out of town over a rumour that started with a misheard prayer. You've seen a woman forced to stand at the back of church for a month because someone said she was seen whispering in the graveyard after dusk. Talking to spirits, they said, or devils. She was visiting her mother's grave. Scholars sometimes debate whether gossip in rural Victorian life functioned as social control or communal bonding. The truth is, it's both. It keeps people in line, but it also connects them. You might hate the whispering, but you also lean in when something juicy floats by. You participate, you contribute. Because being in the know is power. Being out of the know, that's a fate worse than poverty. But occasionally gossip does something good. It alerts you when someone's sick, when someone's hungry, when someone's husband hasn't come home in 3 days and might be face down in a ditch. The whispers carry warnings as well as curses. They say who needs help, who's hurting, who might not survive the winter, and when the village listens, really listens, it can come together, not with fanfare, but with bread, broth, and warm blankets placed quietly at someone's door. So you watch what you say, and you watch what others say about you. You practice neutrality. You perfect the raised eyebrow, the sigh that could mean anything. And above all, you never repeat anything unless you're sure it's already been said twice. Because in a village like yours, your reputation is your second skin, and it peels just as easily. You don't steal, of course. Not really. Maybe a bit of firewood when no one's looking, a bruised apple that rolled off the cart, a spoonful of treacle from a jar that probably wasn't sealed too tightly to begin with. But you're not a thief. You're just trying to survive. Everyone does it, even if no one says it out loud. It's not about greed. It's about getting through another week when your stomach growls louder than your conscience. But the law doesn't see it that way. The law, in all its polished boot glory, sees black and white, right and wrong. Bread in your pocket. You're a criminal. Didn't pay your taxes on that chicken. You're a fraud. Took some coal from the roadside pile even though it's freezing and your baby's lips are blue. Clearly you're a danger to society. The punishments are harsh. Always. Because rural justice isn't about rehabilitation, it's about example, and examples get made on a regular basis. The village stocks sit in the square like a threat carved from wood and iron. Everyone pretends to ignore them, but they're always there, always ready. You remember the first time someone was locked in them. A boy, no older than 15, caught stealing a hen. He swore he thought it was his aunt's, but no one believed him. They strapped his wrists in and left him there all day in full view. Children threw turnip peels. Old women spat. By sundown his face was raw from wind, and his pride never quite recovered. He moved to another village soon after, or ran. You never found out. Petty crime is everywhere. A hoe goes missing. A sack of oats turns up half empty. Someone's cow gets milked overnight and no one can prove it. People mutter, accuse, argue, but rarely act. Until it's something bigger. A barn set on fire. A pig slaughtered and left in pieces behind the alehouse. Then the constable comes. He's not local. He arrives from the nearest town wearing a uniform that's just a bit too clean for these parts. He looks at your village like it's a nest of vermin he's been sent to clear. Questions follow. So do accusations. And when no one confesses, the punishment often lands on the one with the worst reputation. Justice by rumour. Your cousin once got whipped for stealing a silver spoon. He didn't do it. Everyone knew that. But he had the face of someone who might, and that was enough. He stood shirtless in front of the church while the constable lashed his back with a knotted rope. 15 strokes. The sound still rings in your ears when the wind is just right. His mother wept. His father said nothing. That was the worst part. Some crimes are more final. Horse theft, for example. That's not a slap on the wrist or a stint in the stocks. That's hanging. No trial, no debate, no forgiveness. A horse is worth more than most men around here. You've seen it happen. A man swinging from a tree on the edge of town, boots dangling, face blue, and a sign pinned to his chest. Thief. The sign is more for you than for him. And the gallows. Sometimes they travel. A set of collapsible beams and ropes brought in on a cart like a carnival attraction. The whole village comes out to see, even if they pretend not to enjoy it. Some bring children. Others bring bread. You watch, not because you want to, but because you feel like you have to. As if looking away means you don't understand the stakes. The man up there could be you, or your brother, or that neighbour who keeps chickens a little too close to the road. Here's a grisly little fringe fact. In some rural communities, the bodies of hanged men were left swinging for days. For the crows, they'd say. A warning, a lesson. The law wasn't just about punishing the guilty, it was about terrifying the rest. You'd think it would make crime disappear. It didn't. Hunger always wins in the end. But it's not all brutality. Sometimes there's the workhouse instead. If you're caught stealing, or if you simply can't pay your debts, they send you there. You don't need to commit a crime to end up inside. Just being poor is usually enough. You've never been there, but you've heard stories. Cramped rooms, endless chores, food that barely qualifies as edible, families separated, children made to scrub floors until their hands bleed. They call it relief. You call it slow suffocation with clean walls. Some turn to poaching. It's illegal, of course. The forests are owned by the local gentry, and all the animals in them, from the tiniest rabbit to the most majestic stag, are considered private property. But meat is meat. You know a man who goes out at dusk with a snare and a knife, comes back with something hidden under his coat, and sells it to trusted buyers in the village. If he's caught, he'll lose a hand. But his family eats. Theft is only part of the picture. There's fighting too. Drunken brawls behind the alehouse. Feuds between families that have lasted 3 generations over a fence post or a disputed marriage. You've seen a man chase another through the fields with a shovel. You've heard screaming in the night, followed by silence too deep to feel safe. Sometimes the church steps in. The vicar gives a sermon about righteousness, about resisting temptation, about how God sees all. He doesn't mention the landlord who raised the rent again, or the magistrate who lets his own sons off easy. The law may be blind, but it definitely listens to money. Historians argue whether the justice system in rural Victorian England was inherently cruel or simply reflective of the times. Some say it kept order in places where order was fragile. Others point out that most of the crimes punished were crimes of poverty, survival acts turned into moral failings. Either way, you learn quickly that the law is not your friend. It's a stick waiting to swing, a rope already tied, a name whispered behind closed doors. You keep your head down, you keep your hands busy, And when your neighbour's chickens go missing or someone's laundry disappears from the line, you don't ask questions. Because out here, innocence doesn't protect you. Only invisibility does. Winter doesn't arrive all at once. It creeps. It starts with the damp that settles into your bones, the frost that glitters along the windowsill like a warning. The sun vanishes before supper, and the mornings become a cruel joke, the kind where your breath fogs inside the house before you even step outside. Every creak in the floor sounds like it might be the one that gives way. Every breeze through the walls feels like the cold death of summer tapping on your shoulder. You brace yourself, layering every threadbare garment you own, and praying that this will be a mild one. It never is. You've never been warm in winter, not properly. There's no such thing as central heating. There's just the hearth, which burns weakly because wood is scarce, and coal is scarcer. You collect what you can, fallen branches, dried dung, sometimes peat if you're near a bog, but it's never enough. The fire becomes more of a symbol than a solution. You gather around it like worshippers at a failing altar, hands outstretched, backs always cold. Everyone's sick, constantly. Coughing becomes the background noise of the season, a chorus of rattling lungs, wheezing children, and elders who sound like they're being slowly crushed from the inside. You cough too, deep and raw, but it's normal. You drink weak tea and chew on burnt bread crusts because someone said once it helps. It doesn't. Your ribs ache from the effort. Your home, if you can call it that, is a trap in winter. The walls weep with condensation, the roof leaks, and the corners bloom with mould in all shades of despair. The floor is so cold you lose feeling in your toes by midday. You tuck yourself into bed as early as possible, not for rest, but for warmth. Everyone piles in. You, your siblings, your cousins, sometimes a dog. The air smells like sweat, smoke, and sour milk. It's horrible, but it's better than freezing alone. Outside, the world becomes white and silent. It looks beautiful if you're foolish enough to trust appearances. Snow smooths over the rot, makes even the crumbling cottages look magical. But beneath it is ice, cracked stones, and animal waste. Walking becomes a gamble. You slip, twist your ankle, split your lip. You curse the snow, but you need it too. It fills your water buckets when the pump freezes, and it covers the latrine pit when the wind won't let you near it. Food becomes the central concern. Whatever you harvested is long gone or has grown suspiciously soft. Root sellers offer turnips, carrots, and potatoes, but they're shriveled, frost-kissed, and barely edible. You boil everything, again and again. Soup made from bones, or sometimes just the idea of bones. If you're lucky, you get a scrap of meat, fatty, unidentifiable, and cherished like gold. Salt pork is a miracle, but it's usually gone by mid-January. Some nights, you dream of butter. Just that. Butter. A yellow smear on bread you don't even have. You wake up salivating and furious. One time your neighbour shared a jar of goose fat, and you treated it like pudding, spooning it out slowly and licking your lips while your stomach both thanked and hated you. And then there are the animals. The ones you haven't already eaten have to be kept alive, and that's no small task. The barn is colder than the house. The cow's breath freezes in mid-air. The chickens stop laying. You find one dead, stiff as firewood, and have to decide whether to bury it or boil it. You boil it. Burial is for spring. Illness comes with the cold, and it doesn't knock first. A child starts with a sniffle and is buried a week later. Old men lose track of their toes. Frostbite, they say, like it's just another chore. You once knew a girl who fell into the river while fetching water. The cold seized her lungs. She made it home barely, but she never walked quite right after that. People say she was never quite right in the head either, like the cold reached in and took something more than just warmth. You take precautions where you can. Hot bricks wrapped in cloth at the foot of the bed, socks patched together from other socks, boiled vinegar in a bowl to clean the air. But when your breath freezes in front of you and your fingernails turn grey, you start to wonder if all the layers in the world could ever make a difference. You light a candle and watch it flicker, pretending that tiny flame could fight the night. And then sometimes comes the fire. When heat is so scarce it becomes dangerous. Chimneys clog with soot, sparks land where they shouldn't. Someone falls asleep too close to the flames. You wake to screaming, to smoke choking your lungs, to your mother throwing water from a cracked basin that's half ice. You've seen cottages burn to the ground, watched neighbours stand barefoot in the snow, weeping as all they owned melted into ash. You don't run toward the fire. You run through it, grabbing what you can, a kettle, a blanket, a child. Anything else is a luxury. Once you heard of a boy who drank antifreeze, not on purpose, just a bottle of something from the back of a cart, sweet and strange, a gift from a cousin who knew a man in town. It killed him within a day. You don't even know what antifreeze is, but you remember that story every time you drink anything unfamiliar in winter. Historians often debate how Victorian rural communities handled winter. Some claim the camaraderie, the gathering of families, the shared resources, the storytelling, helped them survive. Others argue the season exposed the brutal gaps in the system. The inequality, the neglect, the utter lack of preparation. Both are true. Sometimes the village came together. Sometimes it just crumbled in slower motion. You don't hope for spring anymore. Hope feels naive when your fingers are too stiff to sew and your legs tremble just from walking to the outhouse. You endure the season like you endure everything else. You mark the days by the frost patterns on the window, by how long it takes the fire to catch, by how many socks you're wearing, and whether or not you can feel your toes. When the snow finally begins to melt, it's not joy you feel, it's caution. The thaw brings floods, mud, disease. Things buried start to rise, rotted vegetables, broken tools, memories you tried to forget. But it also brings bird song. The first one you hear makes you stop in your tracks. A robin, maybe, or a lark. It's not singing for you, but you let yourself pretend it is. You survived, just barely, and you'll have to do it again. But for now, the air no longer hurts when you breathe it. That's something. The fair arrives like thunder on a sunny day, sudden, loud, and full of barely contained chaos. You hear the first rumours a week before, that a cart's been spotted on the old road, that the Tinkers are coming, that someone saw a dancing bear near the toll bridge. By the time the tents go up in the meadow past the church, the entire village has lost its collective mind. Children skip chores, old men sharpen their coins, and even your grimmest, most joy-resistant neighbours start scrubbing their shoes and planning excuses to wander down just for a look. You go, of course, everyone does. You put on your cleanest shirt, the one that only smells mildly of smoke, and you follow the crowd across the fields. The path is a mess of footprints, churned mud and chicken feathers, but you don't care. You hear the music before you see the fair itself. A shrill pipe, a drum, a fiddle playing far too fast for its own good. It's irresistible. You break into a jog, then suddenly there it is, a chaotic sprawl of tents, carts, wagons and shouting. Smoke from roasting meat curls into the air, mixing with the scents of sweat, ale, sawdust, and that one particular fairground smell that could only be described as goat-flavoured panic. The fair has no organisation, no logic. It's part marketplace, part performance, part fever dream. You can buy a roasted eel, throw a rock at a painted target to win a sausage, and watch a woman pretend to be possessed, all in the same 5 minutes. The first thing you do is try not to get robbed, because you will get robbed if you're not careful. Pickpockets are everywhere. Boys with quick hands, girls pretending to drop things so you'll look down while their friend slips a finger into your purse. You keep your coin tied inside your shirt and still, you pat your chest every few minutes just to make sure it hasn't evaporated. But even the threat of thievery can't spoil it. For one glorious day, the village isn't just mud and misery. It's colour, sound, movement. You gape at the man juggling fire while standing on a barrel. You shriek with laughter when the strongest woman in Yorkshire lifts a pig above her head and dares the audience to do the same. A few brave lads try and nearly rupture something. Then there's the food. It's all bad for you. All of it. Greasy pies with fillings that defy classification. Bread so stale it could be used as a weapon. Sticky buns covered in something that might be honey, or might be glue. You eat it all. Your stomach rebels almost immediately, but you keep going because this is the only day of the year where you get to choose what you eat, even if your choices are questionable meat, or definitely poisoned apple. You drink ale that was likely brewed in a barrel last cleaned during the reign of Henry VIII. It burns going down and makes you feel warm enough to take off your scarf. Within the hour, you're flushed, dizzy and arm-wrestling a farmer's son while two travelling musicians play a tune that sounds like it was written for drunkards and pigs. The fair isn't just about fun, it's also about business. Peddlers hawk pots, pans, ribbons, lace and miracle cures. Cures being used loosely. One man swears his tonic can regrow hair, fix your bowels and make your husband stop snoring. You buy a tiny bottle just for the novelty. It tastes like vinegar and regret. You pass a fortune-teller's tent. It's draped in tattered red cloth, and inside sits an old woman who stares at you with glassy eyes and murmurs, "You will cross water soon." You nod, though the nearest body of water is a pond full of dead frogs. Still, it's exciting. You feel important for a minute, like fate might care what happens to you. There's always one act that crosses the line. This year it's a man who lets a badger bite his arm while he sings a hymn. People cheer, coins fly, you wince. Someone next to you says they saw him last year with a different arm. You don't ask. By evening, the fair becomes something else, something darker. The laughter gets louder, more desperate. The shadows stretch. People drink more, argue more. A fight breaks out near the jugglers, and someone gets knocked into a tent pole. The whole thing collapses, sending pies and curses flying. The music doesn't stop, though. It never stops. Then come the lovers, hidden behind carts, in the hedgerows, slipping off hand in hand into the woods. If you're one of them, you don't care who sees. If you're not, you pretend not to notice. The fair always births a few scandalous stories, and by morning someone's virtue is gone and someone else is pretending they were never there at all. Here's a peculiar fringe fact. Some rural fairs used to feature mock weddings, temporary unions blessed by a costumed priest in a clown wig. Just for laughs, they said. But a few couples took it seriously, and there are documented cases of people claiming their fairground wedding counted legally. The courts disagreed. Eventually you stumble home, pockets empty, belly aching, ears still ringing from the fiddler's final tune. You smell like cider, sweat, and burnt sugar. Your feet are blistered. You probably caught something from the eel, but your heart feels lighter. For one single day, you were something more than tired. You were thrilled. You laughed too loudly. You danced badly. You felt like a person again. You collapse into bed without changing clothes. Your mother mutters about your muddy boots. Your little brother steals the fortune-teller's ribbon you brought back. The baby cries, but you don't care. You fall asleep with sticky fingers and a half-eaten meat pie still in your pocket. Tomorrow it's back to turnips and blisters. But tonight you dream of fire breathers and brass bands, of flashing lights and the smell of roasted chestnuts. And for a moment in that dream, you're not poor or hungry or cold. You're just alive. Bath night arrives like a seasonal flood, inevitable, chaotic, and deeply unpleasant. It's not that you don't want to be clean. You do, in theory. It's just that being clean costs water, fuel, time, and more energy than anyone in your house has left at the end of the week. So, instead of regular washing, your family has developed a tradition. One full bath once a week. Maybe. Unless it's planting season, or carving season, or it's just too bloody cold. You know bath night is coming when the old tin tub is dragged out from its usual hiding spot behind the woodpile. It's dented, rust-speckled, and shaped like it was forged by someone who hated backs. It wobbles when you step into it, and heaven help you if the floor is uneven, which it is. A wedge of firewood gets stuffed underneath one side. That usually does the trick. Usually. Water comes next. Buckets upon buckets, hauled from the well and heated in the iron pot over the fire. It takes hours to get enough for even a shallow soak. The process starts early in the afternoon with your mother muttering about how filthy everyone is, as if it's a personal betrayal. She ladles the hot water into the tub and adds just enough cold to avoid scalding the first bather, who of course is your father. He gets the best of it. The cleanest water, the warmest temperature, the longest soak. He sits in that tub like a king, scrubbing with a bar of lye soap and a piece of rough cloth, humming to himself and leaving behind a ring of grime so dark it could qualify for parish registration. Once he's out, your mother has her turn. She works fast out of modesty and necessity, because by now the water's cooled and the fire needs tending. After her, the rest of you go in descending order of importance, or size, depending on your mother's mood. The youngest gets the murkiest bath, a grim stew of other people's filth. You can't even pretend it's water by that point. It's body broth. You lower yourself in, gag a little, and start scrubbing anyway, because not washing is worse. Your skin prickles with chill and shame. Sometimes you share. Siblings in pairs, facing opposite directions, knees drawn up like shriveled parrots. There's no dignity in it. Just a desperate dash to clean your armpits and hair before someone else splashes you in the face with a handful of used water. You use a jug to rinse, you use a cloth to scrape, you emerge damp, shivering, and somehow not feeling cleaner. You dry off with whatever's available, a scratchy towel, a flour sack, your own shirt if it's already wet. There's no privacy. just a vague attempt to turn away while dressing. The curtain hung between rooms is thin and full of holes. You hear everything: dripping water, shifting feet, someone complaining that they lost their sock. It's not relaxing, it's barely hygienic, but it counts. You're clean, or clean enough to avoid your mother's disgusted sniff when she hugs you at church. The tub water is used again, sometimes for scrubbing the floor, sometimes for rinsing muddy boots, and on more than one horrifying occasion for laundry. You pretend not to notice. Clean is relative. You'd think this once-a-week ritual would be sacred. It isn't. It's often interrupted. Someone forgets to boil enough water, a pig escapes, and someone has to chase it across the village while half naked. A neighbour shows up at the door to borrow salt and walks in on your aunt standing in the tub singing about sin. You all pretend nothing happened, but the entire village knows by morning. Here's a filthy little fringe fact. Some rural families shared bath water, not just with each other, but with neighbours, rotating homes so everyone got a turn. Community baths in copper pots, usually accompanied by ale and awkward conversation. Let's get the dirt off together sounds like the start of a scandal, but really, it was just economy and necessity having a very uncomfortable marriage. Hair washing is a separate ordeal. It happens once a month maybe. You heat water, use soap so harsh it turns your scalp red, and try not to scream as your mother drags a comb through the tangles. Lice fall out like confetti. If you're fancy, you rinse with vinegar. If not, you just deal with the sting and the smell. You braid your hair tight to keep it from getting worse. It does anyway. Soap is homemade or bartered. It smells like ashes and regret. It leaves your skin raw and your hands cracked, but it's better than nothing. Some women add herbs to make it smell nicer. Lavender if they can find it. Mint if they're desperate. Once you got a hold of a rose-scented bar from town. It lasted 3 uses before being dropped in the fire by accident. You still mourn it. Bathing during winter is its own unique torment. The room never gets warm. You hover near the fire until it's your turn, then sprint to the tub like it's a race for your soul. You wash quickly, teeth chattering, steam rising from your skin like you're being exercised. You dress in front of the fire, trying to warm your clothes before pulling them on. Sometimes you cry, quietly. It's not the cold, it's the everything. Historians often romanticize cleanliness among the Victorian poor, imagining petticoats flapping in the breeze and cheerful mothers washing rosy-cheeked children in sunlit basins. The truth is closer to horror than whimsy. Cleanliness was a luxury, soap was expensive, warm water took hours, privacy didn't exist, and yet people managed. Somehow. You think about what it must be like for the rich. Baths every day, perhaps. Servants to heat the water. Towels as soft as dreams. You imagine stepping into a tub with clean water, all to yourself, with soap that doesn't peel your skin off like a rotten potato. It feels like a fairy tale. You hold that thought in your mind as you scrub your knees, scraping away the week's grime and disappointment. After bath night you feel slightly better, not new, not fresh, just less awful. You crawl into bed, hair damp, skin stinging, and hope the clean feeling lasts longer than a day. It doesn't. By morning, you're sweaty again from chopping wood. By noon, there's soot on your cheeks and mud on your calves. But for a moment, you are clean. And that's enough. Until next week. Death doesn't knock in your village. It just slips in through the chimney smoke or rides in on the morning fog. One day, a neighbour is at the well complaining about their aching back, and the next, they're laid out stiff and silent in the front room while everyone whispers about what finally did them in. No one acts surprised. Around here, death is as ordinary as rain, and nearly as frequent. It starts with a smell, a strange sour scent that's not quite the usual mould or pig droppings. You follow it and find the dog whimpering near the back door. That's when you realise someone's passed. Whether it's your grandfather, your cousin's infant, or the old woman 2 doors down who used to give you sweets made of boiled treacle and judgment, death doesn't differentiate. It simply happens, with or without permission. The house falls into immediate uneasy silence. Doors creak closed, curtains are drawn, and clocks are sometimes stopped, as if time itself should pause out of respect. Mirrors are covered too. Superstition, really. Something about keeping the spirit from getting trapped. You don't question it. You just do it, because not doing it would be worse. Nobody wants a trapped ghost lingering around the hearth. The body stays in the house. There's no funeral home, no parlour reserved for the dead. It lies right there in the same room where you eat, sleep, and argue about missing spoons. It's washed by family, usually the women, and laid out on a table or the bed dressed in their best, which, admittedly, isn't saying much. You've seen trousers buried with patches, corsets with half the laces missing, and shoes with holes so large you could see the clouds through them. The wake isn't solemn so much as exhausted. Neighbours file in, say their piece, mutter prayers or folk blessings, and leave behind a crust of bread or a hunk of cheese if they're feeling generous. A few say too much. One time a man reminisced about the deceased stealing a pie from him as a child. "Good times," he said, while his widow blinked at him like she might grab the poker. Then comes the question of burial. You don't own land. Most villagers don't. You rent your plot, and when you die, you rent your grave too. If you're poor, and of course you are, you get the cheapest available option, a common grave shared with others, marked by a wooden cross if someone remembers to carve one. These markers rarely last through the next winter. The wood rots, the names fade. Eventually no one remembers who's buried where. The ground is dug again, the cycle repeats. Coffins are a luxury. If your family can scrape together the wood, or borrow a second-hand box, you might get one. Otherwise it's a shroud and a prayer. And yes, second-hand coffins are real. Some are built with trapdoors on the bottom. The body is lowered, the trap is sprung, and the coffin is reused. Efficient, if deeply unsettling. You pretend not to know. You walk behind the cart to the churchyard. There's no hearse, just a rickety wheelbarrow, maybe a borrowed cart, depending on who has one to spare. You carry the body yourself if you have to. It's cold, the wind bites through your clothes, and the road is muddy no matter the season. The church stands silent, its doors open just enough to suggest mercy. The vicar mumbles the service, his voice half swallowed by the wind, and then it's over. The ground claims another. There are no headstones unless someone with money takes pity. Most graves are unmarked or remembered only by location, just past the twisted U, or beside the fence near the north wall. Sometimes people visit, sometimes they don't. Grief looks different when you're poor. There's no time for dramatic mourning. You weep for a day, maybe two, then it's back to the fields, because the pig still needs slop and the roof still leaks, even when your heart's cracked in two. Women, especially, are expected to carry grief quietly. Black clothes, yes, if you have them. A black ribbon will do if not, but no wailing, no fainting, just a bowed head and a stronger grip on the laundry line. Men get away with drinking a bit more at the pub and blaming it on sorrow. You just get tired. The traditions are a strange blend of religion and folk magic. You stop the clocks, you cover the mirrors, and in some households you even open a window to let the spirit escape. Some whisper prayers, others whisper warnings. Not to speak the name too often, not to touch the body's left hand, not to cry directly onto the coffin. You're not sure where these rules came from, but you follow them anyway, just in case. And then come the stories, because once someone dies, they don't really leave. Not entirely. You hear footsteps when the house is empty. You smell their soap on the wind. You find the teacup they used, unwashed, exactly where they left it. Maybe it's imagination, maybe not. No one dares to say. There's an accepted level of haunting that rural folks just tolerate, like damp walls or lice. You don't speak to the dead, but you don't ignore them either. Here's a wonderfully macabre fringe fact. In some Victorian villages, it was customary to take mourning photographs of the deceased, propping up their body, opening their eyes with wire, and posing them with family members. It sounds unthinkable now, but it was considered a final loving memory. You've never seen a camera up close, but the idea chills you. Not the death, but the pretending, the attempt to freeze a moment that's already gone. Historians argue about how death shaped rural communities. Some say it created stronger bonds, forged through shared grief and communal ritual. Others point out that it hardened people, forced them to move on too quickly. You suspect both are true. You've seen people cry while peeling potatoes. You've seen laughter at funerals, not out of joy, but sheer exhaustion. Children learn about death early. There's no sheltering them. They help wash the body. They see the burial. They ask questions that no one knows how to answer. You knew death before you knew how to spell your name. You stopped being afraid of it around the same time you realised your life wasn't guaranteed to last past the next harvest. But even now, even with all you've seen, there's a weight to it. A pause in your breath when someone coughs too long. A glance at the sky when a baby won't stop crying. A silent prayer when someone's late returning from the fields. You don't fear death exactly. You just wish it would stop dropping by so often, and you wish, deep down, that when it finally comes for you, someone will care enough to remember your name. Entertainment in your village comes in two flavours, mildly pathetic or deeply unhinged. There is no theatre, no music halls, no novels being passed around, unless someone's uncle stole a penny dreadful from the town library and is now hiding it under a floorboard like it's contraband. You don't have leisure time per se. But when the work is done, or at least ignored long enough, people will scrape together what little imagination they have left and try to have fun, in their own strange, grubby, sometimes dangerous way. The most common form of entertainment? Each other. That's right. People. You. Your family. Your neighbours. Sitting around the hearth in the evening, telling stories that start with a grain of truth and balloon into heroic sagas of pig wrestling and narrow escapes from angry geese. You know the stories are exaggerated, but you laugh anyway. What else are you going to do? Go to the opera? The alehouse is the unofficial village stage. After sunset, the regulars gather, cheeks ruddy, ale sloshing in cracked mugs, and tongues loosened just enough to provide entertainment or start a fistfight. Or both. Someone always has a fiddle, and it's rarely in tune. That doesn't stop anyone. Feet stomp, hands clap. Someone attempts a dance that nearly takes out a chair and two onlookers, and that, friends, is considered a good night. One of the alehouse favourites is rat baiting. It's exactly what it sounds like. A barrel is filled with rats, and a dog is let loose to see how many it can kill before time runs out. People bet. People cheer. People pretend they're disgusted while placing their wagers. You've watched once. Just once. The rat squealed, the dog howled, and someone passed out halfway through from either excitement or the smell. The whole building reeked of wet fur and stale beer. It was, apparently, a highlight of the month. Then there are the puppeteers. Travelling performers who arrive with carts covered in tarps and eyes that haven't slept properly since the last plague scare. Their shows are chaotic masterpieces. Wooden figures on sticks performing morality tales that quickly spiral into nonsense. A greedy landlord gets eaten by a crocodile. A milkmaid defeats the devil using a rolling pin and a prayer. The children scream with laughter. The adults pretend not to enjoy it, but they're the ones who toss coins into the hat at the end. Your favourite part, though, is the shadow plays. Someone stretches a sheet between two chairs, lights a lamp behind it, and starts crafting silhouettes with their hands or cut-out figures. There's a magic to it, crude as it is. A dog becomes a dragon. A man becomes a monster. You watch the shadows flicker and forget, just for a moment, how itchy your socks are or how empty your stomach feels. Games are improvised. There's Kick the Stone, which is exactly as thrilling as it sounds. There's who can hold their breath the longest, usually ending in someone fainting and someone else declaring victory while laughing too hard to stand. On special occasions, someone finds a deck of cards, missing 3 kings and a jack, and invents a whole new game around the gaps. Arguments follow, friendships fray. The game ends when someone storms off or the cards get accidentally thrown into the fire. Holidays offer the most elaborate diversions. May Day brings out the maypole, usually with ribbons that haven't been washed since the Napoleonic Wars. People dance in circles, trip over their feet, and pretend they're enjoying themselves, even as the mud tries to claim their shoes forever. Bonfire night is another big one. A towering stack of wood is set alight. Someone burns an effigy of a political figure nobody really understands, and children throw potatoes into the flames, which then explode spectacularly and singe someone's eyebrows. And then there's the entertainment that isn't exactly planned. Drunken brawls, public proposals that end in rejection, and 3 weeks of whispered mockery. Someone bringing a musical instrument they think they can play, only to be booed after the first 5 notes. One time, a man brought a goat to the alehouse and claimed it could predict the future. It didn't. It just ate someone's scarf and then relieved itself on the floor. A particularly odd rural tradition involves dressing up as animals and running through the village at night to scare away spirits, or more likely to scare old men into dropping their tankards. You once joined in, with a fox mask made of burlap and buttons. You tripped over a bucket and tore your skirt, but you swore you saw something flicker in the dark that wasn't entirely human. You still don't know what it was. Probably just a trick of the moonlight. Probably. Fringe fact of the night. In some Victorian villages, tooth-pulling was considered a form of entertainment. That's right. A travelling dentist would set up in the square, invite spectators, and yank teeth from screaming victims while children clapped and old women cheered. Bonus points if the tooth came out with a satisfying pop. You once watched someone get their molar removed with what looked suspiciously like a fireplace tong. They passed out, the crowd loved it. Of course, there's always music. If someone has a fiddle, a pipe, or even just a strong voice, you've got yourself a show. You sing too, when no one's listening. Folk songs mostly. Dark little lullabies about babies stolen by fairies or sailors drowned in storms. Even the happy songs have death in the third verse. It's tradition. Historians like to talk about how rural life was simple, and they don't mean it as a compliment. But what they don't get is that you don't need much to be entertained. Just a story, a shadow, a terrible song and a mug of something warm. You make do, you have to. You go to bed some nights with laughter still echoing in your ears. Not often, but enough. And sometimes that's better than food or warmth or new boots. Sometimes it's the only thing that reminds you you're still human, that there's still a spark inside all this muck and misery. So you laugh, you dance, you tell a story that's too wild to be true but too good to skip. Because in a life like this, joy is rare, but not impossible, and that's worth staying up for. You've always dreamed of leaving, not in a lofty romantic way, but in a desperate throat-tightening, anywhere but here kind of way. Because as much as you try to find moments of joy in the soot, the gossip, the bathwater stew and the rat-based sports, there's a part of you that knows this village is not the whole world. There's something bigger beyond the hedgerows. You can almost smell it. Salt air maybe, or factory smoke, or fresh bread that didn't come from flour with weevils in it. The idea of escape flutters around your head like a trapped bird. Some days you squash it down with chores, other days it pecks at your ribs, and once in a while, someone, usually a second cousin who owns exactly one book, mentions emigration, and suddenly your ears perk up. That's the word, emigration. A one-way ticket to somewhere distant and mythical, where the ground isn't just slightly soggy forever, and you don't have to share your bed with lice and your dignity with the local gossip circuit. You hear about the schemes first through whispers. A man in town collecting names for passage to America. Another in the next village who says he has a contact in Canada. Free land, they say, better wages. No landlords breathing down your neck. It sounds perfect. Too perfect. Which of course means it probably is. Still, people do go. Sometimes a whole family disappears overnight, off to Liverpool or Bristol to catch a ship. The village talks, obviously. They'll drown. They'll be eaten by wolves. They'll be back in a week, penniless and sunburned. But the truth is, most of the time, no one hears from them again. Whether they thrived or died, it's hard to say. Letters are rare. The post is slow, and sometimes people just vanish on purpose. You start to collect stories, bits of hearsay, fragments of possibility. One girl says her cousin got a job in New York making dresses for rich ladies, even got her own room with wallpaper. Someone else says their uncle was given 10 acres in Australia just for showing up with a pulse and 2 usable limbs. You have neither cousin nor uncle, but you do have a pulse and some limbs. You count that as progress. Then come the recruiters, smiling men with 2 smooth hands and shoes that aren't covered in mud. They set up in the square or the alehouse, waving leaflets and talking fast. They say things like New World, Gold, and Escape the Drudgery. You don't understand half of what they say, but it's the tone that hooks you. Hope with a side of salesmanship. One recruiter offers you a spot on a ship bound for Boston. You ask how much it costs. He says, not much. You ask again. He says, only your soul. Then he laughs. You don't. You've met enough smooth talkers to know that every cheap escape comes with a hidden trapdoor. Still, you're tempted. Who wouldn't be? Your daily life involves washing in rain barrels, sharing boots, and praying your cough isn't tuberculosis. You hear that in Canada you can build your own house. In South Africa there's sun all year. In America people ride trains faster than horses and eat meat every day. Every day. It sounds fake. You want it to be real. But here's where it gets grim. Many of those ships aren't safe. You know this because your neighbour's son tried it. A ship to Halifax packed shoulder to shoulder with desperate people. They ran out of food halfway across. Disease swept the deck. He arrived half dead and spent the next year sleeping in a barn fighting rats for scraps. He wrote home once, said he'd rather die in the old village than survive in the new world. Then the letters stopped. Fringe fact, some ships, called coffin ships, were so badly managed, more than a third of their passengers died en route. Cholera, dysentery, starvation. They weren't just names on a manifest. They were people like you clinging to hope and a hand-me-down coat, coughing in the darkness of a creaking hull. But still, you think about it, late at night, when the wind howls and your stomach growls in reply, when your little brother cries himself to sleep because he's hungry, and your mother just stares at the wall like she's forgotten how to blink. You wonder if there's a world out there where children don't have to share a sock, where laughter isn't rationed, where life doesn't feel like a punishment for being born poor. You know what it would take to leave. Some money, a name on a list, someone to write you a letter of recommendation full of lies. You could forge it maybe, or beg the vicar to speak kindly. You've thought about it. Not seriously, but not seriously either. And yet, you hesitate. Because here's the ugly truth. The village may be rotten, but it's your rot. You know the rules here. You know which patch of road always floods, which neighbour will lend you a spoon, which dog not to pet. Out there, it's all unknowns. You could arrive and be nothing, or worse, less than nothing. Just another face in the crowd with holes in your shoes and hope leaking out your ears. Historians often argue whether emigration was salvation or surrender. Some say it gave people a new lease on life. Others claim it broke families, scattered communities, and fed the machine of empire. For you, it's neither. It's a maybe, a what if. A story you tell yourself when the village gets too small, too loud, too cruel, and so you stay, for now. But every time a cart creaks through the village headed east, or a bird flies south with confidence you've never felt, you look up and wonder. Not because you hate your home, but because some part of you still believes foolishly and fiercely that maybe there's something better waiting. Somewhere, anywhere. And that belief, as fragile as it is, might just be enough to keep you moving. Even if your feet never leave the mud. They arrive unannounced, the way bad weather or unexpected babies do. Upper-class do-gooders, armed with clipboards, tiny spectacles, and the kind of judgment that drips off their voices like candle wax. Reformers, they call themselves. Philanthropists. Missionaries of decency. They come from cities with marble staircases and indoor plumbing, wearing stiff collars and faces that suggest they've never once dug a ditch or boiled laundry over an open fire. They look around your village like it's a museum exhibit of everything wrong with the world. You're told they mean well, that they've come to help. But the moment they step off the coach and start wrinkling their noses at your chickens, you have doubts. The first sign they're in town is the whisper of excitement from the vicar's wife. She suddenly starts using words like opportunity and improvement, and insists your mother starch her apron before church. There's a buzz in the air like something might actually change, and it does, but not how anyone hoped. They start with questions, hundreds of them. What do you eat? How many people sleep in your bed? Can you read? How often do you bathe? You stare at them, unsure whether to answer honestly or invent a fantasy where your daily routine doesn't involve removing lice with a knitting needle. If you say too much, you're pitied. If you say too little, you're accused of hiding something. It's a lose-lose dressed in velvet gloves. Then come the inspections. Not official ones, just visits. They tour your cottage like it's a haunted house, making polite sounds of horror at your cracked windows and dirt floor. One woman, her hair piled high enough to block sunlight, peers into your pantry and recoils. "Oh dear," she murmurs, as if mouldy cheese is a personal insult. Another tries to teach your sister how to fold linens properly, which is a bold move considering you own 3 linens and all of them double as bandages in a pinch. They hand out pamphlets, advice columns, tracts about temperance and cleanliness and the moral superiority of boiled cabbage. You read one that says bathing twice a day is essential for the soul. You laugh so hard you nearly choke on your own soapless spit. Still, you accept the free soup when it's offered. You listen politely when they read from a book about virtue. You even nod when they suggest singing hymns instead of gossiping. Because as much as you resent their condescension, you know better than to bite the hand that hands out biscuits. And yet, it grates. Their wide-eyed wonder at your poverty. Their insistence that if you just tried harder, you'd be clean, well-fed, and morally upright. As if hunger is a personal failing. As if your mother's back isn't bent from labour and your father's hands aren't permanently blackened from soot. As if you all chose this. Occasionally one of them brings a camera. A camera! It's huge and awkward, and the photographer treats it like a holy relic. He lines up children against broken fences, asks mothers to look natural, and then immortalises your misery in black and white. Later these photos will be shown at society events back in London, where people sip tea and marvel at how quaintly poor you look. And then there are the charity children. You know them by the shiny buttons and stiff new boots, given by some society with a name longer than the child is tall. The boots blister, the coats are too tight. But still, they're dressed like walking proof that reform works. These are the success stories. And if they fall behind or act out, they're shamed twice as hard. After all, they were rescued. Fringe fact: in some cases, wealthy reformers would adopt poor children from rural villages, taking them into city homes to raise them properly. It was often seen as a golden opportunity. Sometimes it worked. Other times it ended in abuse, neglect, and permanent separation from families who had no say in the matter. You've heard of a boy taken from your village 3 years ago. No one's heard from him since. His mother still sets an extra place at the table. The reformers mean well, you try to remember that. They bring medicine sometimes, and soap and books, always books. They say education will lift you out of poverty. You believe them, a little. But it's hard to concentrate on reading when your stomach is louder than your thoughts, and your fingers are too cracked to turn the pages without bleeding. Some villagers genuinely like them. The school teacher swears they've done wonders for literacy. The vicar's wife says they've brought a touch of civilization to a forgotten corner of England. And yes, maybe things have improved a bit. There's a new pump in the square. The school has more chalk, but it's not the reformers who patch your boots or sit up all night with the coughing baby. That's you. What they never understand, what they can't understand, is that you don't need saving. You need wages, land, doctors who know more than how to apply mustard plasters. They think handing out prayer books is enough. They don't see how hard you already try, how proud your mother is of her garden, even if it only grows turnips, how your father sharpens every tool twice to make it last, how you sew your own clothes from the fabric of things long dead. Historians will later debate the impact of rural reformers. Did they alleviate suffering, or simply document it for entertainment? Were they allies or invaders? You'll never be in those books, but you know this. Help that comes with judgment isn't help. It's theatre. You're just the unwilling cast. Eventually they leave. They always do. Back to their tidy houses and funded charities and carriages that don't creak with every pebble. The village exhales. Things return to their usual slow rot. But now, there are rules stuck to the church door, posters about hygiene, and somehow your life feels even more inadequate than before. Still, you keep going. You wash with the soap they left behind. You use the bandages they donated. You read the books when it's too cold to sleep, because while their help may be wrapped in arrogance, it's still help. And if there's one thing you've learned living here, it's how to take what you're given and make it yours, even if it comes with pity. The past never really goes away out here. It clings. To the walls, to the smell of your clothes, to the way people say your name with a memory tucked into every syllable. Even when the people are gone, even when the cottages collapse into mossy skeletons and the church bells go quiet, the village remembers. It holds on tighter than it should. It doesn't like letting go. You walk the lanes you've always known, and every crooked tree, every broken fence has a story attached to it. That stump over there? That's where your uncle fell asleep drunk and got bitten by a weasel. The sagging shed behind the blacksmith's? That's where your cousin tried to hide during her failed elopement. Even the ditch by the stream has history. Someone drowned there. Someone else got baptized there. And some days, you think both were the same person. But lately things feel thinner, emptier. You see more shutters nailed shut, more windows with no curtains. Some families moved to the city. Others didn't survive the last winter. The names you grew up with, Cartwright, Hobbs, Pickering, are being whispered less and less, replaced by silence. You wonder what it means to vanish from a place like this. Not just to die, but to fade, to stop being spoken of, to become one of the nameless bones buried under the churchyard yew tree. You walk past the old schoolhouse, the one with the slanted door and chalk ghosts on the walls. It's boarded up now. No children left to teach. No chalk left to scrape. You press your hand against the wood and feel splinters, dust, the weight of 1,000 lessons that didn't lead anywhere. The alphabet never kept your boots dry, and times tables never stopped your mother from crying into her apron. Still, it was something. A spark. There's a cemetery at the edge of the village. Not the proper one, but the old one. The place where the original settlers lie, the ones with stones so worn the names have melted into lichen. You go there sometimes when it's too loud in your own head. You sit with the forgotten and feel strangely at home. There's comfort in knowing you're not the only one who lived hard and died tired. You think of all the people who once filled this place, the ones who laughed at the fair, who gossiped about who stole whose pie, who danced badly, wept openly, and worked until their hands turned to leather. Most of them are gone now, but in strange ways they still live here. Their habits are your habits. Their suffering is your inheritance, and their jokes somehow still echo through the pub when the ale starts to flow. Some ruins remain, literal and otherwise. There's the barn that burned during a lightning storm 15 years ago. No one rebuilt it. No one dared. They say it's haunted, but you suspect people just like having one place that's still too dangerous to touch. Some families still keep their witch bottles buried under the floorboards. No one really believes in curses anymore, but no one's willing to test that theory either. You still toss salt over your shoulder when someone sneezes. Out here, tradition is religion. One thing that has changed is the road. It used to be just dirt and stones, rutted and wild, shaped more by hooves than wheels. Now it's wider, smoother. Carriages come more often, bearing strangers with stiff hats and questions about property. You don't like their eyes. They look at the village the way a butcher looks at a lamb. Rumours say someone wants to build over the land, tear down the cottages, drain the bog, turn the pasture into a shooting range for rich gentlemen with too much time and not enough soul. Part of you wants to scream. Another part just sighs. Of course it's ending. Everything ends. Even rot eventually turns to dust. Fringe fact. In a few rural communities during the late Victorian period, locals would rescue parts of abandoned homes, beams, stones, even thatch, and rebuild them elsewhere, preserving bits of history like sacred relics. You've seen it yourself. A hearthstone from one cottage ends up as a doorstep in another. A wooden beam becomes a bench. Pieces carried forward, refusing to vanish entirely. You've carried things forward too. Not just memories, but habits, skills, stubbornness. You still knot your laces the way your grandfather did, still salt meat the way your great-aunt taught you. You still use the same lullabies, the same prayers, the same curses whispered into the fire when things go wrong. They're useless, mostly, but they're yours. There are still children in the village. Fewer, but loud enough to remind you that life hasn't quit just yet. They chase chickens, sneak sips of cider, and whisper ghost stories behind the shed. You hear them laughing and it stings because you remember laughing like that once. You don't anymore, not really, not without thinking of the cost. Sometimes, the past arrives in the form of someone returning. A boy who left for the city and comes back years later with new shoes and hollow eyes. A woman widowed in Manchester who returns with 2 children and no husband to bury. They walk the old paths, visit old neighbours, and speak in a way that suggests they're only half here, like ghosts still tethered to a life they escaped but didn't outgrow. You wonder if you'll ever leave. Probably not. But if you did, you know this village would follow you. In your voice, in the way you glance at the sky before deciding if it's safe to do laundry, in the ache in your bones that starts every time the weather shifts. It would be with you always, like dirt under your fingernails, unseen, but impossible to forget. Historians might study your kind and call you resilient, but they'll never know the full truth of what it meant to live here. The quiet rage, the stubborn joy. The days spent scraping something edible from the earth and still finding the energy to laugh when someone's goat ate the vicar's sermon notes. They'll see the artifacts, but not the people. You're not remarkable. You're not a hero. But you survived. In a place designed to forget you, to grind you down into fertilizer for someone else's legacy, you managed to hold on. You left fingerprints on doorways, scratches on beams, songs in the air, and that matters. The village is changing, you feel it, maybe dying, maybe evolving. But long after the fields are paved and the cottages fall, some part of it, of you, will remain. In the roots, in the wind, in the bones beneath the yew tree, and that you think is enough. And now, as the candle flickers low and the room grows quiet, you sit with everything you've heard tonight. You've walked the mud-churned lanes of a forgotten village, shared the bitter bread of the poor, listened to laughter in draughty alehouses, and watched funerals pass with nothing more than a nod. You've felt the rot, not just in the walls and floorboards, but in the marrow of life itself out here. And somehow, against all odds, you made it through. You learned that survival is less about strength and more about knowing where to place your hope, even if it's a tiny tattered thing that fits in a coat pocket. That family isn't always kindness, but it is always there. wedged into your life like a stubborn splinter. That a shared bath once a week can be both humiliating and sacred. That entertainment sometimes involves rats, or a badger, or just a well-timed fart joke. And that dignity isn't in fine clothes or clean boots, it's in how you carry yourself when no one bothers to look. Sure, the reformers came, they stared, they wrote their little reports, but they never saw the whole truth. Not really. They missed the warmth in the misery, the humour in the hunger, the fierce loyalty beneath the gossip. They tried to name your suffering like it was a problem to solve, but they never understood what it felt like to grow up with cold feet and big dreams, with one eye on the weather and the other on your next meal. And through all that, you endured. Not as a symbol, not as a footnote in someone else's story, but as a person. Flawed, tough, tired, funny, loud, loving, occasionally lice-ridden, but real. You mattered. Not because of what you achieved, but because of what you lived through. So now, with your blanket tucked up to your chin, and the last echoes of the village fading into the soft hush of sleep, know this: those rotten lives weren't just hard, they were full of effort, mistakes, connection, and the kind of spirit that doesn't get written down unless someone like you chooses to remember it. And you did. Rest well, traveller of time. You've earned it.